Good evening and welcome to the November 2nd meeting of the Pembroke School Committee. We'll call it to order. Remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded, mainly for the purpose of our minutes. It's also published on the Pembroke Public Schools website, usually 24 hours or so after it's completed, as well as everybody, I'm sure, is watching either on PAC TV or Titan TV on YouTube. We don't have a big crowd. Maureen, might even bring it closer.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah,
Maureen,
exactly.
I have that same bag. North Pembroke fundraiser?
Great. Okay, we acknowledged our visitor. Adjustments to the agenda, there are none that I know of. Communication, there is something that came from National Business Banking Study, which I have no idea what it is, and I'll pass it around. It looks important, it has been opened. Bill schedules were sent out today. I will try to approve them as soon as possible. And move on to consideration of the minutes for Tuesday, October 5th.
So moved.
So, motion by David, second by Lance. Any discussion or corrections?
I saw.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Okay. Okay. So we'll move into the superintendent's report. So, Maureen, you're the only one here. If you want to speak, we'll have you come up at the end of the superintendent's report. We'll get through that, and then we'll go over there. Does that sound good? You don't have to sign in. I can figure this out by now. All right. So, just for the folks watching at home, we've had many discussions over the past several months about the social and emotional impact to students during COVID, during we're coming up on, I think, 20 months of dealing with this. And we have been talking about this a few times, and tonight we're getting an update on that. So, just want to make sure people know the background of it. And this is the purpose tonight, and Jess will start it off. We'll talk a lot about the supports that we've put in place, how we've been using them, and then the path forward. So I will turn over to Jess.
All right. Hello, everybody. As Mike said, tonight we will be updating on our social, emotional, and learning update. Each of the building principals will talk a little bit about their building and some of the supports and services that are occurring, some more specific data on the number of students accessing, some of the reasoning behind it as far as kind of categorizing, some of their clinical kind of observations and recommendations, and then getting into kind of our next steps, some of the supports we put into place, knowing that we were coming into the school year and students would be impacted both socially and emotionally, and then some of the data that we collected even towards the end of last year. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the professional development as well. Mr. Talbot is going to start. Each of the mental health staff worked with their principals to kind of share out information, pretty much the same kind of format, looking at kind of the sessions of all of their mental health staff, some of the reasons behind things, and why students are accessing, and then again getting into some of their recommendations and observations. So.
Just real quick, because I almost forgot, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but if we could pause after each school just to get feedback or questions from the committee, but also remind folks at home, thank you, David, if you have questions in real time who aren't here, scinfo@pembrokek12.org. Superintendent will review the mailbox. If it's something we're on topic, we'll answer the question then. If not, we'll make sure we get back to you. But just if people have questions, scinfo@pembrokek12.org, and she'll remind me if we have questions that come in. So sorry about that, Mark.
First of all, I want to start by thanking the two high school social workers, Holly Garrity and Rachel Gowan, who helped prepare this data for me. And they did so during last week's power outage. But I had asked them clearly we could get it by Friday. But you find folks, and then
Sorry,
of
can you
course,
bring the mic closer?
Nope.
Thank you.
I've got to start over because if they're watching at home, I want Holly and Rachel to hear. I'm giving a huge shout out. I asked them during the week to prepare this for you fine folks in time, and then the power outage happened. And then I got an email on Friday afternoon from them. So they've been working on it. I think they might have actually gone to a Starbucks as well. Talking for the meeting. So I'm really appreciative of the dedication and the commitment. And so to me, the important numbers, I think, in the high school presentation are right here on this slide, which really talks about the numbers, right? That's where it gets down to brass tacks. And the number of sessions that they have had so far is at 364. It's greater than that now. It's as of October 26th. So if you extrapolate that out for a 10-month school year, we're right around where we were last year as well. So those numbers increased certainly last year when the pandemic was in full bloom, and we are still right about at that level. So the needs and the concerns are still very prevalent, you know. I think what's interesting is in the shift for some of the reasons for those sessions. If you compare the reasons to the right-hand side of that slide there, this year to last year, 50% of them this year are you know, really the big three, right? Anxiety and depression and stress management. While they were high last year, they were not that high, right? So the longer we're in the pandemic, I think the increase in the need to support students, and this is no surprise to anyone here, but it's manifesting itself right here in these sessions, okay? You know, the number of family issue type meetings, the good news, I suppose, is that's declined from where it has been in the past. So I guess you try to find a silver lining, you know. In the next slide, it has a breakdown for students seen by grade. Nothing really stands out there. It's pretty spread out evenly amongst our 4 grades. What does stand out a little bit to the right of that slide is the educational status. The number of regular education students that are not on an educational plan, that are being seen by our social workers is increasing. Not dramatically so, but there's an increase over the past several years. And so when we talk about the impact and some of the services that Holly and Rachel are providing, there they are on the left-hand side there, okay? A lot of CBT, a lot of DBT, a lot of self-care and mindfulness strategies, helping students really with their depression and their anxiety in the moment, trying to help them cope in the moment and get themselves regulated and back to class. Certainly, I think a lot of this is stemming from the real demand for therapy outside of school, those private therapy sessions, and it's really hard right now for our students to be seen by out-of-school service providers. I think a lot of that's falling on schools, not just in Pembroke and not just the high school, but certainly, you know, throughout the country and in the globe, I'm assuming. If you look to the right-hand side of that slide right there, what jumps out to me is the reduction in the short-term psychiatric hospitalizations, all right? Those numbers are staggering when you think about the 17-18 school year, where it was 26 and then 28 the next year. The decrease to 18 last year is not because fewer students, I think, are in need. I think it's because there's fewer availability, or less availability for our students. The fact that there has been 2 to date this year, I mean, so I want to celebrate the fact that it's such a small number, but I want to keep in mind that I want to really drill down why is that, right? Because I know the demands are there. Our data is indicating that our students are utilizing our in-school supports. And so I just think it's something to keep in mind, you know. In terms of clinical observations from what Holly and Rachel are reporting to us, what they're seeing, I don't think it's a surprise that we are seeing an increased need to monitor the depressive symptoms of our students because, as I said, the lack of available outpatient mental health therapists. Naturally, there's an increase in the anxiety due to the pandemic. They are seeing a decrease in student distress tolerance skills, and they're working on that in a lot of those DBT sessions. We're trying to build that capacity back up in our students. What is interesting to me is the increase in students referred for somnatic complaints, kids who cannot sleep, having a hard time sleeping because of what they're dealing with. You know, there are some positives, right? I think, though, when you pull out of this, there's an increased awareness in what our teachers' capacity to support students' mental health. And, of course, Power, right? Power, therapy dog, is a hero here this year. Our students are constantly asking me, when is Bauer coming in? You know, is he in today? Because he's not in 5 days a week. It was a gradual introduction. He started out once. He's now up to 2 times a week. The goal, obviously, is to get there. I get a big kick, though, when kids are asking me what it's on, because they want to see it's on. And staff, too, by the way. those are all great things too. So we appreciate your support. We appreciate the resources you're providing for us here at the high school and throughout the district because it's definitely needed.
Questions for Mark?
Of course I asked that. I'm just really asking, how is the staff holding up? If we're seeing a slow but steady rise, and I would think especially for students that may not have been in the building at all last year, and the affirmation of just coming back into class, how are they holding up? Are they able to manage this increased frequency of visits? And how are they managing the time that probably some of these students are asking for?
I would say that, and I don't want to speak for the principals, but I probably am. I am tremendously proud of our staff. Is it having an impact on them? I think it is, but they are putting on the best face and they're doing everything they can, and they're coming to work every day and broadening their own capacity to help support our kids in the classroom. And that's challenging. It's hard. I was talking to everyone today, in fact, in some ways I feel as though it's already March, it's already April, it's only October. And by that I just mean just how, how draining a lot of it is.
Exactly. I mean, I think about it from a parent's perspective, and I know the drain for us, and I mean, we're trying to support the students at home, but I mean, there's a job to do, and now there's this additional support, and I guess my question is, or maybe my statement is, keep us posted on what our staff support needs may be, because I don't think there's a person at the table that doesn't realize, because we're tired.
Sure.
We so if we're feeling it, we know they're feeling it. So I guess really just want to make sure everybody's hanging in there. And if there's something we need to think about, and there's more that can be done, I guess just shout it out.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
And Susie, at the end, I will talk about the professional development we are providing our mental health and wellness staff through Rebus. So we had a day in August, and then they come back in November. And although it is geared towards students and working with students on strategies and trauma and the impact of the pandemic, we did discuss and go over kind of some self-care pieces in August as well. And as you know, in the past we have. Part of the second time Rebus is coming back in November, we did do a survey of the mental health and the wellness staff, asking what they would like to be addressed during the second day. So we use some of that to kind of adjust our agenda.
I think everybody's just suffering from some serious COVID fatigue, and I don't know what the
Certainly.
real term is, but I know in our house, sometimes it's just like, how come I just feel tired all the time? How come I'm not excited to go out of town? It just seems like another chore. So if I'm feeling it and my husband's feeling it, then, I'm worried. Everybody's probably feeling it. So I think it's important that people know we know that's happening.
Certainly.
So thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else? Mark, I have a couple quick ones, maybe quick ones. Agree that if we straight line the 10 months, right, for the 364, it comes up to 1,800 and change. I guess two things I was thinking about when I looked at the numbers. First, if you look at last year, we had about 5% less students enrolled because of people who were in cohort D that we weren't seeing, that weren't fitting in that number. And the other students that we had, the kids that were in school for about 70% of the school year, were only in school for 2 days. So I wonder the normalization of that number. And if you look at the 1,800 for this year, if we straight line it, compared against 2017, 2018, the numerator number of students was higher. I didn't realize we had dropped as much as we had until when we talked earlier today. So I wonder if our numbers are on a gross basis are up. I'm sorry, are flat, but on a relative basis are up. That is what I would want us to look at or consider when we think about that.
Good points, yep.
Because the other part is the anxiety piece with that. When I saw that, it made me think back to the January meeting we had when the students came in and presented their survey, and that was the same exact thing. And at that point, we put in, right, we changed the way tests were given, right, so that they weren't all taking them on the day they were in school. What are we, and I know you talked about some of the things done in the sessions. What are some of the other things that we can think of for the rest of the school year to try to reduce anxiety? Some of it I know is natural, but what can we do? I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you first, I know, I'm putting you on the spot. Somebody else needs to know.
Right, so I think some of it has to do with being proactive and some of it is absolutely reactive, right? So knowing that, obviously last week we had 3 days without power, we knew that the anxiety level of kids because the end of the term was coming. The first text message, I think on Thursday morning from both Mark and Donna was, can we extend the term? We know that kids want to know that the term is longer. So I think being more quicker to respond to the known pressure, I think, is something that we can do. But I think the structure has been proactively set up to support kids a little bit better, knowing and learning what we learned from last year. But I think as much as we give credit to the staff of the building, I give credit to our administrators. The flexibility and willingness to be flexible and shift and change course is like nothing I've ever seen or could have, more than we could have hoped for. So I think, just being more sensitive to what everything compounded for a student looks like and being in there in the moment, making the change that we know will have the greatest effect on the largest number of kids.
So then, I guess my last question, moving ahead, this isn't going away on June, whatever day we finish school, depending upon power outages or snow or whatever else. It's not going away. What does summer support look like for these students? Because these numbers are right, 1,800 contacts over a year. That's pretty significant when you talk about a school of about 800. What are we thinking for potential summer programs? Or is there a thought, or is it something that we'll hear more about in the budget?
I would assume the latter of that, right?
So it's
that
definitely
we'll-
something we'll talk more about when we get to the budget cycle. In years past, we've had Interface as a resource for families where we could set them up with that kind of concierge service that got them the provider and dealt with the health insurance. Pembroke is not currently a participant in
Right.
Interface. It's on, obviously,
Yeah.
the horizon to get back into it, but there's quite a wait list, just, you can tell even from the information that Mark provided. Outside
Yeah.
services are really hard to come by right now. So, obviously, we're interested in getting back into that pipeline, but at the same time, I think as we get into the budget cycle, we'll start to talk about what structure and support we can have in place for kids.
Yeah, what does an engagement model look like? We've talked about this before in special education, right? If it's a student who needs support, for kids who are on the cusp, right, leaving in June and coming back in September, or in some of the other social issues we've dealt with, I just think this is different, and we need to think how we're going to engage those students and families over the summer, right? I don't know, I had this discussion with a couple people last week. The role of public education has changed, and it changed dramatically over the 20 years I've been doing this, and changed more over the 20 months we've been talking about this. So I just want us to think through that as between now and when we get through. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Definitely put my face into this because I definitely
Next up
talk kind
is
of.
Dr. McGarrigle for PCMS.
Right in your face.
Can you hear that? Good, all right. So I first of all want to thank the superintendent and Jess and Mary Beth and all of you for giving us this opportunity. I think that it just speaks to this team and how current you guys are in wanting to understand the information and think about kids holistically. So I think it's really, really timely. And I know my entire team that kind of helped me with this presentation really appreciated this opportunity to talk to you about what the experience has been like for kids so far. So I started really broad. So I started with my guidance counselors who kind of see everyone and more kind of like the holistic whole school supports. So the guidance counselors teach all the students, so they're all in classes and they all get a curriculum. And because of that, we can be dynamic in what we teach and when we teach based on the needs we see for the kids. So they started with kind of team building, communication, connecting. That's what all of my teachers did. And they went to goal setting and study skills. And as we were kind of going through those first few cycles, we started seeing that there was more children making poor choices with social media than is typical. And we started having more concerns around kids' understanding of use of substances and stuff. So kind of like at a kind of tier one broad level, we've kind of adjusted the curriculum now, and that we're shifting that for all students so we can deliver that information to all students because we see that as a need in both grades. 7th grade, you start a little lighter, and then in 8th grade, when you go through the same unit, you get a little deeper. And guidance counselors, again, are always looking to connect with students, so they're being in lunch. So this year we have all the 7th graders in lunch. There's like 200 plus students in lunch in 7th grade and 200 stuff plus students in 8th grade. So there's a lot more students. It's great because it gives kids an opportunity to like collaborate with each other or throw on different teams. But helping kids get used to the expectations around lunch is just, it's still a process, but getting better. So I had my guidance counselors do an academic check-in. So last year, it was just, a very different year and weren't able to do the academic check-ins. I think it's really important that guidance counselors have a one-to-one individual check-in with each child every term. So we do that, we start that around progress report, and we try to get it done before the term ends, which they've done, so they've completed their progress, their check-ins. From those check-ins, then more students get identified, right? Who's not doing, oh, I didn't realize they weren't doing that well, or there's things that the child might share kind of in the check-in, and that kind of then increases kind of weekly or bi-weekly check-ins that the guidance counselors have with some students. They always kind of engage parents and keep them in the loop about that. In addition, we're seeing, so that's like 8 to 10 scheduled weekly or bi-weekly meetings that are just part of their schedule. We're also seeing, as Mark had said, kind of just more a need of reactive, responsive services. So the good thing is if you know your guidance counselor, that might be the person you felt comfortable going with in the situation going on. So they're getting a lot more drop-ins than typical. They're thinking about an average of 4 per day, and they're the 504 coordinators. So again, just thinking broader at the middle school, some of our proactive structures, we meet weekly with each team of teachers, including the nurse, me, and all the counseling staff and guidance. And we're seeing like a real increased need to keep each other in the loop and communicating constantly with each other as well as with teachers based on the level of student need. So I think that need to collaborate has been even higher with what we're seeing in the schools this year. We are also seeing more kids this year getting to a place where their capacity to manage the stress in their life is overwhelmed. So we've been dealing with many more crises at this point, which is just much more than we typically would be dealing with at this point. But I think it just speaks to stress levels in general. So we've been working with crisis teams and with families as needed for those students. And just kind of some of the other day-to-day things that the psychologist and the social worker do. And then I kind of just broke it down by the different content areas. So the school psychologist completes evaluation. She did 45. Right now we have 45. This year, that will just build. So last year we probably had, I don't even know, 36, maybe 34 on the books, and it was 45 at the end of the year. So 45 is where we're at right now, and it'll get much bigger. And then she wrote down what she's doing as far as her daily check-ins, the amount of student unplanned drop-ins she has, the counseling services for students on IEPs, and the social groups she's running. The other thing that she's doing is she's supervising the school psychology intern, which again is 40 hours a week of free good stuff. But she spends 2 to 3 hours minimum with her because she goes through all the reports. She checks that she's doing the administration of the test correctly. She checks the lessons for social skills. She consults with her so that she can be comfortable signing off on her license when he gets to the end of the year. The school psychology intern also has her own caseload and mirrors a lot of the work that Brianna Kerr does. And again, she gets her own evaluation caseload as well as social emotional support caseload. And she's at the high school 1 day a week. I think it's PCMS day 3, which is random days at the high school. And then the .5 social worker, she has her 2 to 5 scheduled daily check-ins. She also has 1 to 4 unplanned. And then those are the students she's on counseling services with, as well as the general ed students. And then she has 4 social skills groups, which, as you know, if she's here 3 days a week, means that she sees one of the groups twice a day because she's here .5. So the only way to schedule it was to do it kind of twice in 1 day. But the other really, really good news is I'm in the very, very final stages of the hiring process for the additional .5, which I am deeply grateful for, and I thank you all. So I've already been working with that person. Natalie's meeting with her on Thursday, so we're hoping maybe Monday. I'm having a conversation with the new hire on Thursday to work out her schedule. So my current social worker does odd days 1 through 5. In some ways, it would make sense to have the new person do days 2, 4, 6 and have someone there every day. But what would happen then is all those kind of support structures that kind of make us collaborate together and talk about the same group of students who maybe we're all seeing would be a gap. So I'm going to work with her to create a schedule that makes sense, where we can really keep her integrated in the team, because I think that's the best way we grow as learners, as well as giving her days where she's there by herself, where she has her own caseload. And then this is just to give you a quick picture of numbers from one year to the other. So special education students, not all special education students get counseling services on their IEP. It's about, I don't even know, it may be about less than a third. So we have about 68 students, and there's about 20 students with counseling services. So you can have a special ed and not have social emotional needs as articulated on IEP. So this year there are 20 students that have counseling services. There were 16 last year. We're seeing, as Mark had said, a significant increase in the general ed and 504 population of need, 12 from last year, 20 for this year. So although we see an increase, I think what's really telling is when you think about the level and complexity of need. So when you look at minutes, so we had 16 the year before for counseling supports and 20. So in 2020-21, we had 570 minutes of required counseling services. That's just the baseline of what you have to contractually give. This year, to start off, we're at 790 minutes of required counseling services, a very, very significant increase. And then you build up all the other students who have needs, whether they're long-term or short-term. So I think the need is there. Obviously, I think you're aware of that, but I think, what do we do? I think we do what we're doing, which is just continuing to connect with kids, build relationships, and understand that, like, the more you connect with kids, the easier it gets in deciding what supports they need, and working with families to help educate them and support families and support teachers too. So sometimes with teachers and with us, as even the staff up front dealing with more of the students, you have to reframe and use some support techniques for yourself to manage the stress. So we kind of would give the teachers the same kind of strategies we were working with the students on as far as a way to support. But they're all working really hard, and they understand the importance of the work, and that this stuff is base and foundational as far as then shifting to, like, learning in other ways.
Questions?
It's what I do. I was looking for the breakout. Do you have a breakout, or do you find the breakout of the different triggers or
So I think it
causes
would
are
look
similar
the
to what
same.
PH?
Yeah. So our social worker's new this year, and she had been tracking data in the same way.
Oh, okay.
So I think that we see a significant increase in anxiety. Anxiety has been a very big category for a long time, but we're seeing it increase. What we're also seeing much more of this year is depression, and depression in a way that it's very clear it's depression.
And they're best friends.
Yeah,
anxiety,
but like
depression.
very clearly depression, not like, oh, I wonder if this child's a little depressed. Like, it's like, oh no, like really struggling with feeling connected back to kind of who they are and how they're functioning. So trying to get the right supports in place, and also support families, because it's very, like as you had said, very stressful for families right now.
And so it's not
wants-
really, we can't really say that this is tying back, because I guess I'm thinking back in the days of middle school, and we used to get, I don't know if they were Zonk or Zap reports, but, they were triggers in our house for anxiety because of the academic piece of this, but I'm not getting a feel that this is necessarily just, academics are involved, but this is, obviously it's bigger with the COVID piece.
It's still that, but I think there's also other layers now.
Yeah.
I think there's additional layers. And I think the world keeps getting more and more stressful, actually, and I think kids are absorbing it more. I think they're aware of things the way that we weren't aware of, and I think they're just much more stressed, and they feel a lot of pressure to look good, act good, get good. I mean, every single checkbox. There's not a checkbox they're not going to check. They want it, they all want it all, and they have high standards for themselves, and they don't always feel like they're where they want to be, so they get really anxious.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I know this from my own daughter, but, so I know social skills and things like that are, there's a lot of kids struggling right now for a lot of reasons.
Yes.
You mentioned,
Yep.
like, not knowing the protocol for social media and that kind of thing.
Yep.
What do you have a plan to address it? Like, how do you address that?
So you identify through counseling kind of who may need additional support. So sometimes that's individual, sometimes that's in a small group, sometimes it's short-term, sometimes it's long-term. So it's based on what you're seeing, and then you loop it in. So you want to hold kids accountable when they're making, because they should know, right? But you also want to then have that parallel path of like, okay, how do we build skills? How do we do both, right? We want to hold them accountable. We want to like empathically understand that how do we build skills? Because our goal is to make students functional holistically.
So is there like, I think my question is more like around, I mean, because I feel like this is every kid, honestly, because they've missed out on so
Yeah.
much because of the pandemic. And I'm just wondering, is there like a holistic approach that you're taking with all of it? Is like, or is that in the, is that something you might address for summer learning? I don't know. I'm just
21st century a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So like, you know, in 7th grade, it's really very kind of a gross look at social media right now, like just having the kids measure it. They'll go deeper into it in 8th grade. So we do deliver it through that. The teachers do talk about kind of relationships and connections and social skills. And then the teacher will let us know. We meet once a week with the teachers and we take detailed notes on that. And we do that across time. So we take detailed notes and we have a tab so we can like check over time if student names come up multiple times and then identify from there too. If we feel like student needs specific sports.
And specifically
In
for,
groups or not,
for
yeah.
social skills, most of our staff, and maybe not the new social worker, but we can talk about it, have been trained in the social skills. Michelle Garcia Winter's social thinking curriculum, so they are using kind of a set curriculum in some of their social skills group, both in special education and in general education. So that is something that we implemented several years ago. And our staff have been trained as well, kind of a train-the-trainer model.
okay, yeah. I was just wondering because
Yeah,
I know
you do
it's
see
like
the
a-
gap.
And it's more
Yeah.
elementary based,
Yeah.
but some of our middle school staffs, the school psychologist and the guidance participated too,
Right.
so.
I'm just thinking the need is so much greater than
Yeah,
it ever
and
has
even like I
been.
said in lunch, like there's more of us in lunch because I
Right.
feel like we're just trying to help kids regulate, and like again, you connect with them, but you're like, no, you want to,
Yeah, you have to redirect.
stop
I'm sure
visiting.
it's,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
got to be much more challenging than ever, so. All right, thanks so much.
Yeah, just quickly, if I may, and hopefully you can hear me here, I usually have a pretty loud voice. I think one of the feedback points I'm getting from a lot of parents, and it's more that middle school and the kids transitioned, you know, into high school, the isolationism. They were kind of so used to finding their little point in the house where they could do their work without, you know, the kitchen, the TV, the whatever. I've had a lot of parents say to me, gee, my kid comes home, kind of goes upstairs in his room, whether he plays on the computer or does whatever, and I don't know. I mean, you're not seeing that side of the kid going home and doing it.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking, do we see the kid alone at recess, alone at lunch, or, you know, sitting there
At
kind of,
lunch we do.
and are we reaching out to those kids?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
again, offering some kind of services or some kind of involvement and seeing what makes them tick. And, you know, I see it with my son. You know, he's very quiet, he's very reserved, and he's very content in a sense because he's spent the last year or so being alone, you know, without classmates and that stuff. And it's, I see it in a lot of his friends. I see it in some of the neighborhood kids. And again, just wanted to point it out. It's nothing we're doing, it's just that to them is the new normal, if that makes sense.
No, I would agree that there is a sense of disconnection a little bit from what we kind of have all experienced, but I think we see it in the students. And we definitely would monitor that in lunch. So at lunch, we'll monitor like who's sitting by themselves or they look uncomfortable. And certainly we kind of check, we may check in with the kid, we may actually go at it different ways. We talk to other people that know the child well and kind of go at it different ways, and we check to see if we can either build kids around him, which we've done several times this year. So we just help them develop a peer group subtly sometimes, and then sometimes it's more officially through social skills. But if you can help kids just make connections more subtly where they don't feel as raw, that meets the mark. Do you know
Yeah,
what I
no,
mean?
I think it's
So,
great.
yeah.
But to be, I don't want to sound crazy. I
No,
want
no,
to be
it's
on the,
painful.
I want to be
I'm
on the
not saying when you're
lookout
at
for those
lunch and you're
kids, whether
seeing,
it's
you're like,
elementary
"Oh."
school, whether it's the high school, whether it's the
Yeah.
middle school.
Yeah.
Like you said, a lot of them have gone through a year where, I don't
Their
say they're
connection is
confined to
through
their
a
room,
computer
but
or
yeah.
something, right, yeah.
Thank you.
I'll just jump in real quick, though. Just, you bring up a good point, David, about the lunches, right? In the high school, we have student desks in the cafeteria. And so it's difficult to identify who's sitting by himself or herself. They're in
Right.
straight rows, 4 feet apart, and that has been a challenge, without any question. And so we have discussed this at the building level for sure, our SST, for instance, trying to, you know, the number of kids who want to go to guidance to eat lunch, for instance. That used to be, you'd have a handful of kids every lunch, so a dozen or so a day. That has stopped. And I think the reason is because a student can now sit at a desk by himself or her and not feel isolated because we're all in an individual spot. And I'm not saying it's a good thing, by the way.
No,
It's actually,
no.
it's actually not. It's not a good thing. So, we're keeping an eye out on that, seating patterns, who's sitting in the same spot every day, and are the people around him or her the same people every day, right? And kind of keep track of that, which it's hard to do.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, 8 of the kids come through a day. I happen to have the privilege of having lunch duty outside with the seniors, and it's been a beautiful fall to be out there, for sure. They can sit together outside on tables, and so it's easy to spot a senior who's sitting by himself or herself. And so we're able to identify those students, and like Donna said, bring it up SST, have the counselors check in to make sure that everything is okay, and how can we help support those students. So, but it certainly is a point that's not lost on us, for sure.
Oh, great. No, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Just to touch on that again, like, so sometimes you might like see people that are leaders and really dynamic and are always open to other kids, and you might just say to that, this would really help if you, and we have seen kids be unbelievable with just being inclusive and making sure that they sit near other kids and just involve them, right? So the student feels involved. And other times we might see like 3 or 4 students that look like singletons, and we're worried about them, and then we would vet, like, who do we think they may connect with, what do they like? And then what's been happening with a lot of the social skills groups is I may take them and be like, hey, do you want to just do like a game day? And they take the kids in, they don't know each other, and they do board games. Once a week, once every week, or do you want to invite somebody? And then, like, it's just a way for the kids to start connecting and talking to each other, and then the counselor fades back once they see that the child has made connections. So we're not managing it after that.
That's
But
great.
we
Thank you.
definitely monitor lunch. It's a really key area to see how connected students feel.
John, I have a few things.
Yep.
One, you touched for a quick second on social media in general. And I don't know if it's me or just how I've seen it. It seems like social media for middle school is a bigger issue than the other 2 schools, other 2 levels, I should say, elementary versus high school. What are we doing? What can we do, right? Social media's been in the press a lot over the past few months. Are we doing anything specifically, or do we need to do anything? I know the district attorney's office does something on social media, whether it's for parents or whatever. What are we thinking about doing? What can we do? And I don't know, Mark, if you want to add in, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so I would agree with you that we've seen much more this year than we have in years past. I mean, there's obviously always at times issues, but like more this year than we've seen this early on. And so again, one of the things we're doing is pushing it through 21st right away. So that was going to be probably January. I think it was lined up for January, and it kind of comes to me, we're like, we've got to pull this back, that we've got to give kids the information now. And do I think kids, for the most part, know it? Yes. Do I think like they're getting this information new in 7th grade? No. I mean, I know they've heard this, for years, right? But it's about reminding and then reestablishing expectations. So it's both. Again, like, here's the information, here's the expectation, and then I'm holding them accountable.
But even, that's great, and that's obviously important, right?
Yeah.
But the other part of, because when you talked about checking the box, right, because a lot of people they see on social media, right, but you can do filters and all this other stuff, and what they see more so than not is closer to a persona that they're trying to get to, right? Do they check all those boxes? I guess my question is how do we help them understand that that is not it? That's not the end-all be-all for them, right? And it's okay to be an individual.
Yep.
I guess that's where I'm trying to go to. I definitely understand the patterns of behavior and what's acceptable, not acceptable. I'm trying to get more into how do we teach them that, gee, everything they see in TikTok,
Yep.
right, is only a 1-minute snapshot of somebody's life, so.
So I can just give you a quick,
Yeah.
from today, right? When I was in 21st century in 7th grade, they had graphs showing that like low social media usage, and there was emojis like smiley or sad or whatever, and then it was going up, and she was processing the graph with students saying, so why do we think that the more time you spend on social media, the less happy people are indicating what's that about? And she was facilitating conversation, and they were like, well, it makes you feel less connected. And that was the first day of their
Okay.
digital literacy lesson, is what I saw in this class. So we're trying to get at it like broadly in processing and facilitating conversation. So students were like, well, it's weird because like it makes me feel connected with friends, but then like when I'm on it a lot, I don't know, I feel lonely. And so she was like, right, like why would you feel lonely? So like that, like helping them understand the connection between what they're doing and what they may be feeling and experiencing, as well as the images and pieces that are happening.
Thank you. One of the things you mentioned was talking about parents know some of the students who are getting supports, parents ask for it. And I guess this is more of an ask than a question, and this could go across all the schools. We tell people what's available at the beginning of the school year, but then we expect them to remember and maybe ask.
Especially at
But
middle
if-
school, there's so much comes at them.
Yeah, and if you think about now, we're 7 weeks away, 8 weeks away, no, actually, probably 9 weeks away from the start of school, people don't remember it, and you're not going to remember it until you need it. And then you're not going to remember, or you're not going to think about it until you need it, and you're not going to remember that somebody said something in April, it's in August. So I think it's one of those things, how do we do a continuous reminder of what the supports are available, or what are the things to look for? You
Yeah,
know,
I think that's a
whether it
great
be, whether it be holiday season, right, which we know was a trigger well before COVID. What are the things that we can do to support, right? We started this whole thing off, this discussion off by, we have a different role than we did before. How do we remind people of that role, so we're not just talking about communicating in August and September, we're communicating in December and January? That's just my ask.
Mike,
So-
and
No, I think
maybe
that's a
an
great
easy
idea.
way to get at it, we do include in the weekly blast by the principals and the buildings, some sort of the social emotional kind of corner. So I know, for instance, like North sends out kind of resources and things, so that may be a good place to kind of remind parents about, you know, who to contact in this building if your child's exhibiting this.
Yeah, it's just-
Because it's kind of a natural thing that they're used to kind of seeing.
No, I think
so.
I think it would be good for me to kind of refresh and talk about the different roles and the different supports in the building, for sure. I think that's a great idea.
It's just, you know, as we
Yeah.
go along, and then that's fantastic, because I've seen some of those things in the newsletter. It's just reminding people, because it's going to be looked at on an as-needed basis, not on when we communicate it, right?
Right.
Two other things really quickly that I have, and I know, Aaron said this question came in. We talked about students not doing well. And how do we recognize when half of your student population, good thing about middle school and bad thing, right, is you only have 2 grades. Bad thing is 50% of your population is new to you,
Yep.
right? If it's in this building, a 5th grade teacher talks to a 4th grade teacher, hey, what was this student like last year? We don't have that luxury at the middle school. How do we know? We may look at a student, oh, wow, they're doing pretty well. They're a B minus, C plus, but they were straight A's. And I know some of the things going from elementary to middle. What are we doing? Are we using data to try to identify kids we should look at? What are we doing for identification rather than self-identification?
Yep, so at Progress Report time, I run like a DNF list as well as an A-plus list. I ran an A-plus list this time to look at that for like the rigor piece, so kind of looking at both ends. And I do speak to the elementary schools and gather information on them, and that's not always, right, it's comprehensive, right? But when the kids are coming up, it might be like, oh, Ellen, the social worker, can you reach out to North? That's a North
Okay.
student. Or I reach out, or can you do a cum file review, a cumulative file review? Like, I might do that and put that back into the note. So like, we will identify what we need to do to find more information on the student, based on what the concerns are the teachers may be seeing, or and if a parent contacts me or contacts one of the counselors, like, I just throw that in the note, the next time we go to Kid Day, that's like right up there for us to
Sure.
talk about before, so that we have like an automatic system. Because a lot of kids, a lot of moving information, we've got to have systems to like manage it.
Okay, because that kind of leads me, well, the last question intentionally was, I saw the minutes, right, the number of students in the minutes that are required. How are we doing as far as capacity, right, to do the identification? Because we're having to be more. How do we make sure we have enough capacity so we're doing everything we need to do? Another social worker, you're getting another.
No,
right?
I think that numerically, it's, important, I think, to know and understand what the number looks like. I think that my team is actually, like, very, very strong, and are collaborating really, really well, and I have more confidence this year in my team, honestly, not that I, no insult meant to anyone, but they're really strong, and they're very organized, and they've got it all covered.
I don't doubt that.
And I don't mean
That's
that,
not-
and I know
yeah.
you weren't suggesting that,
No,
but
not
I
at all.
mean, like, we are okay, right? We're okay insofar as, like, we know we're doing what we need to do to help get kids there, which is continuing to support, and there's a time component to this.
I guess let me ask the question differently. We have
Sure.
about a 30% increase in the amount of, right, total minutes per week. We have
Yeah,
about
the
30%
IEPs,
increase.
counting, minutes.
If you think if the school day doesn't extend for them So they have to get everything done between the start of school and the end of school.
Yep.
And we talked about a lot of these other things
Yep.
that your team is doing. Do they have the capacity to get everything done during the school day that we need to get done? Or do we feel they have enough?
Yes.
Okay.
Right,
Yep.
do they teach fewer sections of 21st century skills than they did before, right? It's one less section?
The guidance counselors teach 10 to 11, so it used to be, yeah, they're
Yeah,
teaching
so
a
the-
little less.
With the lower enrollment at the middle school, it's created a little bit more time.
Okay, that helps.
Yeah.
See, that's
Yeah.
the data point that isn't on this. Now it makes sense,
Right.
right? Because that frees up.
I mean, that ended up
Okay.
being a gift that we didn't really realize, right, which often
Fair enough.
happens,
Yep.
right? So, and then we have the social worker last year added in, and it was different last year, right, because of the hybrid and the remote, but this year it's even more important, and we have,
Got it.
yeah.
So
No,
basically,
everything's
you have
good,
more
like,
min-
yeah.
There's more
There's more,
capacity.
yeah, there's more minutes, but there's more capacity because got it.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect, thank you, that's what I was trying to get to.
Yep.
Did you have a question?
Yep, so in the box is a question about, it's more for the high school, but it came in a little bit after Mark was done. At the high school, have you seen any correlation in the increase in numbers to the issues experienced related to sexual harassment allegations in students needing guidance for support on how to cope? So I think that's a pretty specific question, but it might be helpful to talk a little bit more about like what a crisis team looks like, and when there's an event that happens either in our school or in the community, what a reaction looks like for us, as opposed to, this is pretty specific, but.
Yeah, could you read that question again? There's an awful lot
Sure.
going
Do
on
you see
there.
an increase in the numbers related, I'll just make it broader. Do you see an increase, when you see an increase in the numbers related to a specific incident, how does that change the structure of support at the high school, right? Instead of, we're always just going to have 2 social workers, but when there's an issue in the community or in the building, we're going to have far more kids affected.
We have a pretty comprehensive crisis team that we mobilize throughout the course of any given year, depending upon the circumstances. And that crisis team is comprised of administrators, guidance and support staff, and regular education teachers, right, classroom teachers. So, and that crisis team, when it's mobilized, then puts out its tentacles and communicates with staff so that we have all eyes unified on whatever it is, whatever the reason was for mobilizing the team to begin with. Communication is constant and fluid and multi-directional. So, the supports are in place, and they're all over the place, all over the building. So, I'm not too sure if that answers that question particularly, or.
Right, this is a pretty specific question, but I think it's important for just to hit on what we can as part of the presentation, which is that there are crisis teams in each of the buildings, that if there's an event in the community or in the building where the capacity is much larger, because there's much more people involved than just the social workers or the guidance counselors.
So you're talking, because I tried to, when I listened, so 2 questions. Or you hit the point on a major issue impacting the school as we had in the spring. But if there's a trend, I think what I got is if there's a trend in a particular type of behavior, how will we be addressing that? Was that where the question kind of came from? Am I interpreting it correctly?
So I'm interpreting to say, if something happens and there's, a sexual harassment allegation, and
Got
we know
it.
that that's going to hit a larger group
Okay.
of students are going to be affected and feel connected to that incident, what does that look like for those masses who aren't normally on somebody's caseload or who may not be directly related, who may have previous trauma that's not even on our radar? How are we identifying those kids and how are we supporting those kids? I don't think any one specific incident at Pembroke High School has created the uptick in the numbers that you saw in Mark's presentation at all. I think it's definitely a COVID pandemic type situation. I don't think it's a Saturday night football game or a incident with one particular student that's created such a large increase.
I completely agree. Completely agree.
There's another question in here just around, Mark, you had mentioned what it looks like for high school seniors to eat outside and have that social opportunity. Have you thought about expanding that for underclassmen or rotating, given the fact that students have no connection at lunch because they're seated in desks?
We have thought about it extensively, particularly early in the year, and the issue is it's a capacity issue, right? I mean, we only have so many bodies around to cover and supervise, and the outdoor dining area is only so big. And so it has always been a senior privilege. I'm not opposed to necessarily rotating it. I don't know how the seniors would feel about that, right? Since they lost a lot of privileges, although they were juniors then. But so with the inclement weather coming upon us, I don't know how much longer we'll be able to support outdoor dining anyways. But I'm certainly not opposed to the idea, but it would be a larger conversation with the student body, I think, and the admin team, you know. There's only 3 of us out there, so it's hard to cover that much area, you know, so.
There's a couple other questions in the box. They're not related to this topic, so we'll answer them when we get further.
Got it. Okay.
Okay,
Our
Mr. Murphy?
elementary person. Oh,
Perfect.
we're going to school. I wasn't sure if we were doing all of them. Got it. Go ahead.
Okay, so I just wanted to echo Mark and Donna's comments to the school board here, just about the support that you have provided. I can tell you firsthand, the addition of a half-time social worker at Habermock has been instrumental. And you talk about building capacity. It's important just to note that it's not just building capacity with one individual. When you bring in one individual on for a full-time capacity, you then enable other people in the building to take more leadership roles and to take more of an active role in these children's lives. So I was thinking about a story before I got here. And what I see firsthand daily is, you know, I have kindergartners coming in, or first graders coming in, and obviously they wear their heart on their sleeve. They're traumatized because they're leaving mom and dad or whoever their caretaker is. That's fine, but you get up to the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, and they're having the same issues because of, you know, coming out of a pandemic. How are we treating them? What I see in the building, I can speak for Habermock, and I can speak a little bit for North as well, is I see teachers stepping up. I see paraprofessionals stepping up. I see that 4th grader that has difficulty coming in. I see a kindergarten teacher who that child had saying, can I go meet him or her at the door? And, you know, and then somebody from the admin team just goes to cover the class for 15, 20 minutes. Like, that's what's happening at the ground level on a daily basis. So I just wanted to echo that we do have a very strong staff in Pembroke, and that's how it kind of plays out on a daily basis. So, yes, you do put in, you know, money to support mental health, but it has a bigger effect than I think you ever really have known. So I just wanted to kind of mention that just to start out. So, you know, along with everything else, we have our numbers up there, and this chart's difficult because we're all in the blue, but I did have it kind of broken
Sorry.
down. No, it's just the way the program runs.
Same feedback Susie had.
I
There's
heard-
a lot of blue.
I was like, I think I might be getting
You
old
can
because
see
I
it better
can't
if you're
do-
like this.
Yeah, it's better from the
That was
screen.
me.
It's just
I
my
can't blame
back.
the principals. This was a rush to get it to school committee by somebody.
No, it's all on there, so.
We had 3 days of no school, so I apologize, Susie.
Don't.
No, it really looks great on the screen.
Yeah, you only have to apologize to Susie because the rest of us could figure it out.
It's just me.
In the narrative later, I thought was really good, so take some credit for something.
So just a couple of things that I wanted to point your attention to is I wouldn't get too hung up on the numbers of students that the school psychologist supports or the social worker support. That's just on their current caseload. And so what you'll see is a school psychologist has multi-roles within the building. They're providing counseling to kids. They're providing testing to students. They're providing counseling to and consultation to teachers on a daily basis. So just because they have a reduced number at that, you know, as far as 9, does not mean that we're not reaching a lot of children. They just do it in different ways. The social worker, obviously the number is a little bit higher. You may wonder how we get at those numbers. Well, how does a caseload build? And at each of the buildings, like we were talking about up here, we talked about that student support team. And the way that plays out at the elementary, I can tell you, because I've been in 2 of them so far, is the fact that on a regular basis, a team is meeting. So it's the principal, it's the vice principal, it's the school nurse, the social worker, and the school psychologist. And yes, we meet once a week formally. But what we've done is we've built communication tools within the buildings so that in real time, you can pull up a Google spreadsheet, thank goodness for Google, and you can see, you know, so-and-so who had difficulty coming in that morning, and maybe I dealt with that child in trying to get them in, you know, acclimated to the school building. But then the school nurse knows that I was dealing with that as well, so that when she sees that child for a bellyache later on, she kind of knows what's going on and what the reasons were. So yes, we do meet on a formal basis, and that's how we kind of build the caseloads during the week. But we're all in the mix, and I think communication is huge with what we're seeing in buildings right now. So that's just a little bit about the numbers there. I would say across the board, they're all pretty average with the anomaly of grade 2. For some reason, we don't have any students assigned at this point in time. I think it's just an anomaly. And I was trying to think about it as well as I don't really see any extra special education support in those grades. I think it really just is an anomaly. So I wouldn't get too hung up about that. But pretty even across the board. I will say that kindergarten and first grade, we are seeing the most need there. We're seeing kids coming into school dysregulated because they've never known what regulation is. They've never had a formal educational experience, a lot of these kiddos, not having the ability to go to a preschool, not understanding what it means to sit in a chair for 15 minutes at a time. We're doing all those skills right now, and I gotta say that the teachers, as difficult it is because their expectations are up here, they're meeting the kids' needs of where they're coming in with right now. So I think it's important just to mention. I mean, we still have very high standards, but at the same time, we're meeting kids where they are, and I think that's the important information you're probably looking for tonight. So that's a little bit about the numbers there. So some of the reasons for counseling that we're seeing at Habermock, you know, the biggest one you're going to see right on the page is behavior. And behavior is language for kids. I mean, they tell us what they're thinking, how they're feeling, in the way that they act. A lot of us have kids here, and it's no different than in your homes. Behavior, what we're seeing right now is behavior in class, behavior in transition times, behavior in those less structured times like recess, because everything else during the school day is pretty structured. There's not a lot of room for kids to kind of go awry. But those are the places that we see the majority of the behaviors happening. Some of it's acting out behaviors, sometimes it's internalized withdrawing behaviors, but that's what speaks to the reasons why we do counseling here at the elementary level. And then just to the left of the behavior, we have anxiety, and it's hard to see. It's hard to see kids anxious about either coming to school, work production, and I think it just goes to show you that a lot of these kids have not had the daily teaching that they needed to get them to a level where they feel comfortable with the content. And I think that that's the work that teachers are doing on a daily basis right now and trying to meet, again, the needs where they are. So that's the crux of what they are doing on a daily basis. And then that emotional management piece is, you know, it's having those conversations with kiddos about how you are able to cope. Here are some strategies to be able to cope. We often talk about big problems and little problems. It's part of the social thinking curriculum that, you know, the special education department kind of, you know, put on years back. But that still resonates with us at the elementary level right now. And we're always asking kids as a check-in to gauge their feelings about how big of a problem is this. And you have to understand something that, you know, might be, it actually happened today. Somebody forgot their baritone, you know, at home, and it was a big deal for that child, you know.
A big instrument.
It was a big instrument, exactly. So at the same time, we were like, actually, I'm sorry, it was a trombone. It was not a baritone. It was a trombone.
Almost as big.
Exactly. So at that point, you know, we're on the phone with mom and dad. They're going to bring it up to school, and it's like those types of things we're doing on a regular basis just to make sure that we're lessening the anxiety, because that kid doesn't need to go into that class feeling all flustered. So although it doesn't seem big to us, it's big to the child, right? And I think you guys see that the same at the high school and the middle school. And again, we're also embedding a lot of those mindfulness techniques into the day as well. So that's a little bit about the reasons for counseling and how we kind of get at it. Some of those interventions would be, the bigger piece was here would be the student check-ins with that emotional regulation, and how that kind of plays out in a school building would be, you know, either the school psychologist or the social worker are meeting children as they're coming into the building, or at their Titan time, at the beginning of Titan time, at the end of Titan time, right before lunch, to kind of gauge where they are on that day. And we have a pretty large handful of kids that we're doing that with at this point in time, because of kids that are being anxious or just confused about, you know, COVID life, if you will. We're also doing some kind of out-of-the-box things. We actually, very much like Bauer, we have done a little rental of Obadiah. So Obadiah is a beautiful puppy, I think 6 years old, that's what I think I was told. And Obadiah is the most chill dog you'll ever see in your life. Obadiah came to us a couple of weeks ago, and then early release date did not come. It's coming back to the building tomorrow. What we did at the very beginning is we opened it up to the district-wide program kiddos, so they all got to meet Obadiah on the first day, because I do anticipate that this is the group that I'd like to see Obadiah support a little bit more, being the district-wide programs. However, it is important for the entire school community to really get to know who the dog is, because they're going to see a dog in the hallway and they're going to wonder, who's that? So we have actually, I've been able to schedule some times for kindergarten and first grade tomorrow, spoiler alert, to meet the puppy tomorrow. So I say puppy, but it's a dog. So that'll be good. So it's just, that brings in some, just a nice way into the building. Kids see a puppy, they melt. Staff see a puppy and they melt, and it's just, I think it's what we need right now. Granted, it's only for a few hours a week, but it's a few hours that we didn't have before. So kind of out of the box thinking like that, and I got to thank my social worker, Nicole Theriot, for kind of setting that up with Obadiah's handler. So we're also doing, on a regular basis, crisis and de-escalation techniques. I was actually speaking to a lot of the paraprofessionals right now who just got trained in, at the very beginning of the school year with PMT, which is crisis management, and about maybe embedding some of those ideals into their professional goals. So when I talk about de-escalation, how are we meeting kids as they're coming in, and how are we kind of diffusing the bomb, if you will, so that we can kind of stop the behavior right there. And they're doing a nice job on kind of putting those practices into place that they were trained on back in September. So those are just some of the interventions that we were doing there, and it's really kind of moving from a reactive model to a more proactive model. What do I get up there now? I can, yeah, perfect, north. So very similar to,
I
did you want to
promise
have any?
this is Mike's last week of double duty.
That's okay. Did you have any
Is
specific
returning.
questions about Hobart before we go to north?
Anything specific about Hubble? Okay. Why don't we wait till all the elementary's
That's fine,
done?
sure, you got it.
And then you don't have to answer any of the questions. You have to them all because she's last. There's something to seniority.
There you go. Next time. So the numbers, as far as North are concerned, it's very similar, I think, to what we're seeing at Hobart with the percentages across the board, especially at that elementary level. At the kindergarten and first grade level, you're seeing, again, those same, very much the same issues that you're seeing across the board. Of kids not really being ready for school. What did surprise me is some of those upper grade levels at North Pembroke right now, the 5th and 6th graders having those same level of needs. So 17 and 23 percents there are striking to me. But I can also tell you firsthand that I've been involved in a couple of situations that just needed a little adult interaction, a little adult attention to make things kind of go away and to go in the right direction. So again, teachers at the 5th and 6th grade level here at North do an amazing job at kind of meeting kids where they are. It wouldn't, if you walk down the 5th and 6th grade corridor any single day, you're going to see teachers outside respectfully talking to a group of 2 or 3 kiddos, trying to get the perspectives of what's going on between those two as far as the dialogue or the discourse there, and trying to come to a solution. I know Principal Swift has been instrumental in bringing the ideas of restorative practices and restorative circles to North Pembroke, and that's what I'm seeing the staff utilizing at this point in time, especially at the 5th and 6th grade, which is really, it's good to see without her present. It's nice that those ideals are kind of at the front. So those are just a little bit about the percentages there, and then the educational status. I think it's just important to see that, special education and regular education students are utilizing these supports almost as at an equal basis here. I think a lot of times we're thinking kids with special education needs are the ones that really need more of the mental health, and it's not the case. I mean, our general education population is needing it just as much as the special education at this point. And again, very similar to my conversation just at Hobart, as far as the types of interventions. It looks like at North, definitely those check-ins are huge, but the big piece at North is also that collateral contact. So it seems like there's a lot more agency connections being held here at this school. And I know Caitlin Martin, the school social worker, is constantly on the phone with Department of Children and Families, pediatricians, outside therapists, and also directing families about where to get the supports. And I did have a conversation with Caitlin the other day just about what you were talking about at the very beginning, about the lack of therapeutic services for kids on the outside. And we are seeing that as an increased request from parents and caregivers to us about, can you do this type of therapy in school? And then we talk about the types of therapy that we do in school, and then what might be available for you on the outside, knowing that it's not always really available right now. So we try to kind of meet them halfway and put things into place that we historically maybe wouldn't have done in a school building. But somebody's got to do it, so I think the schools is where it's at. So that's a little bit about the percentages there, but I guess the same would be, at Harvard Mock as far as the emotional check-ins. It's nice to see that their crisis and de-escalation percentages are quite low. They're not seeing a lot of kids having huge dysregulation within the hallways and things like that. So that just shows me that it's a more proactive stance that they're taking with it as well. Okay. And I think just, just to wrap up, there was some clinical observations that Caitlin Martin had talked about in her presentation. And I definitely feel, and I know Jen and I have talked about it as well, and it seems to, across the board with all three schools, that the increase in students struggling is really separating from their parents. And I spoke to that at the very beginning, possibly due to the amount of time that they spent with mom and dad on remote learning. It just makes sense. But we're also seeing an increase in social conflict between the students that requires that adult, running that interference, if you will. And that's where those restorative circles come into play. The other pieces are, I'm seeing on a regular basis would be, the kids going to the nurse's office, my belly hurts, my finger hurts, and there's nothing wrong with the finger whatsoever, but they need to see the nurse for a Band-Aid. It's important, though. I mean, even though it's not really happening, it's important to have that child have a connection with an adult that is outside of their classroom so that they know that they have a safe spot to do so. Yep.
Before you go into the
Absolutely.
restorative circles, we had the long presentation a few years ago from Dr. Blatt. It wasn't long in a negative way, just,
Sure.
Right, it was an in-depth conversation.
Absolutely.
I think David and I were the only ones here when we had that. It was
Oh,
that.
okay.
I'm wondering if at least we don't have to have a full presentation. Do we have that? We have to have that presentation somewhere.
Yeah, I just actually sent it to them about when we were gathering this info. This is what we've done in the past, so I can send it to
Could
you
you
guys.
send it
Yeah.
to the committee and potentially post it again on the website? And the reason why I ask, and if there are questions, we'll look at Lance, Susie, and Sue. If you have questions on it, maybe we can get a primer on it, just so you understand the change in discipline. Because I was going to ask a question later, and I'll just make a comment now.
Sure.
The conversation with not a Pembroke-based special education teacher, but a special education teacher from a different district. And we got into the whole discussion on, punishments shouldn't be punitive, right? And how are other ways to work through some of those situations? I mean, you talk to some of them, I think the restorative circles is one of the things. It's just, it would help to get that in front of everyone, and then maybe have some type of short presentation on it in case people have questions, just so give people an update on what that is. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay.
And, I mean, Erica did a little bit of an overview or two, I think, last year, but happy to get it out.
I can send both, things that
Yeah.
we've done.
Awesome, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there.
I think that just that last point that Caitlin was making was really just about, again, I just spoke about this, about the limitations to outside therapeutic services and the need for that. And now that interface is not up and running with us right now, that's one less thing that families necessarily have. So that's a little bit about North Pembroke.
Thank you.
Move on to Jen. All right. Hello. I also, as everybody else echoed, thanking you for these supports. I can speak to it, especially having seen these supports grow from teaching to where I am. We did not have social worker when I was a teacher here at North. We had one psychologist who was mostly known for evaluating, going to meetings. Maybe she checked in with one of your kids every now and then. It just, the capacity wasn't there. So seeing it and to what it's become and living through that is tremendous. These social workers are unbelievable. The relationship with the psychologists are seamless. They, like Mike said, the SST meetings that we have weekly, it's truly that. It's a team where everybody is bouncing the ideas and talking about these students. And the work that we're able to do with them more and do with the teachers to support the teachers more is incredible. And that wouldn't have happened without all of this change. So just having lived it, I wanted to really make sure you understood this impact. Speaking to Caitlin's last slide, I showed Cheryl those observations, and I was like, these are kind of ours too, right? And she was like, absolutely. And as Mike mentioned, the increase in the students struggling with the separation that was our whole first few weeks of school with the kindergartners. And when you think of these kindergartners, not only is that a typical thing for a kindergartner, but some of these kindergartners, really their life has never been leaving their parent because they grew up during this pandemic where they couldn't even leave their house. So for them, the work that our school psychologist and social worker have been doing is tremendous, and you see the change every day as these kids are coming into the building. The adult supports are getting further and further away from the door, and the kids are coming in with sort of the bigger smile as they're getting there. And you see it every day. It's really great, the work that they're doing. The social conflicts, we're seeing that as well. We have grade levels that are starting to address their goals, specifically around how do we really work with these kids on empathy and social skills. We're having difficulty getting through a recess without conflict. We're just trying to play a game of Sparkle in morning meeting without it erupting into a super competitive, they're demonstrating the need for interacting with each other and understanding that it's okay to lose, it's okay to win, it's okay to have this different opinion. So those social interactions and the work that's becoming required is absolutely, we're seeing that as well. The increase in anxiety, seeking out the nurse, they're establishing more lunch groups. They're putting lunch groups more at grade 1, especially, we're finding. It's a lot of new students. It's a lot of new to school students. It's just students that are kind of feeling their way, and the parents as well. A lot of the K and 1, it's new to the parents also because their kids hadn't been kindergartners yet, or maybe didn't go to kindergarten, and now first grade is their first year. So really doing work with the families and the groups at the younger grades is something that we're also doing as well. As far as our numbers, our psychologist does have a relatively high caseload. She has 23 students that do receive specific social emotional services through IEPs. So she spends about 17 and a half hours a week just working on that counseling piece. So where Donna was mentioning that her specific minutes of counseling has increased, we're seeing that increase at Bryanville also. The social worker is also working with students, but they realize that it's, the school psychologist has the specific goals on the IEPs and fewer gen ed students that she's working with, and then the social worker is working more with the gen ed students showing the need that don't have specific IEP goals. That's kind of how it's split out. And grade-wise as well, our upper grades are showing a great need of interaction from our social worker especially, but on that graph, the 5th and 6th is mostly the social worker. If you look at the number of IEP students that the psychologist is working with, her greatest is 3rd and 4th. So that's why the social worker is lower in that area. So it really is pretty spread out and pretty consistent. And then, like I had mentioned, the social worker is more the gen ed, and the IEP services would be through the psychologist. the reasons for counseling, emotional management, self-regulation, coping skills. I think it's something that we're seeing across all levels. They're just trying to understand how to exist in this space, how to sit in a chair at a desk for 15 minutes, listening to one person, attending, building that stamina is all something that the teachers are working on. I know we're seeing it. They're working so hard. We went in a kindergarten room the other day because not only were they sitting and excited, but they were writing their numbers, and they wrote them correctly, and they were just all like, my mind is blown. They were so excited. So it may be taking a little longer than we used to be able to get to some of these, but it's just because of, like Donna was saying before, this is where the building block is. Like, the students aren't going to feel comfortable in school or safe in school and allow themselves the capacity to learn if we don't build that safe, comfortable environment for them. So that is absolutely where our goal is. Student check-ins is the greatest way that our staff is working with the students, similar to the other elementary schools. You know, whether they're anxious or tearful or frightened or worried or confused, that's the, you know, you get the call on the walkie, or you get the call out of the office, or you have the, I like the way you worded it, the unplanned student drop-in. They're just, what do you need? What's happening? What are you feeling? A lot of the work that you mentioned, I was like, oh, nobody mentioned size of problem yet. And then you went and mentioned size of problem. He does. But the social thinking and the perspective taking, the social thinking map that allows the student to say what happened and what was going on in your head, but what could have been going on in the head of others as that was happening. That's all work that they're doing through either their individual sessions or small group sessions or lunch bunch groups, to be able to support the need that we're seeing. And we also have Obadiah as well. Right now, they are using it as part of their counseling sessions, so they are using it with students who have the identified need for counseling sessions, but their thought was they'll do it for 8 weeks with this group of 14 students, see how it's going, and then sort of bring in a different group so that more people can have access to him. And there's currently 7 lunch bunch intervention groups working on social skills, friendship, social media, you know, whatever the need is. We're sort of figuring that out at SST and then working on groupings, and they're doing that work in that sort of safer space.
Questions?
I kind of directed to, with all the elementary, but it seems like a lot of this is spread throughout a pretty significant portion of the population of students in the building. And recognizing we've got kids that have not been able to learn certain skills because they just haven't been out there. Are there any, I know you're talking with families, are there any supports or things we can post or tips that families can, that resource they can look at to even, you know, I hate to say, but kind of practice at home? Not that families have a ton of time either, but if they're, you know, it sounds like you're partnering, but I don't know what type of resources are there. And then the second kind of part of this, recognizing some of these we're seeing where it's a pretty sizable time bite. I'm curious how that's affecting our instructional time. You know, we have X number of staff members and resources in the building, so, you know, how are you managing that and still moving the ship forward?
I can definitely speak to the questions, you know, for the parents and for the families that might be struggling with, you know, how to work with a dysregulated child. I think it really comes down to those conversations that the school social workers, school psychologists are having, you know, picking up the phone and having a 45-minute conversation with whoever that caretaker is, saying, have you tried this? If I were you, I might try this. Let me print up a schedule for you. If you tell me right now what your morning looks like, I'll laminate it, send it home for you, put some Velcro on it, and see how it goes for the next couple of days, and I'll check in with you there. So that kind of stuff is happening. even though, they don't have access maybe to an outside therapist. So we're taking those things on, and that's because it's in their wheelhouse. They know how to do those types of things. Because it's the types of things that they're doing during the school day, we're just extending that into the home. And then the second piece was just about kind of really how to stay on task and how to stay on topic. And I think that those conversations are happening at our grade level teams every week, or every other week, where we're talking more about where are we right now, where do you want to be, and then we're just saying, well, that actually has to take just a side bar right there, because this is really the most important information that we have to get through. And we have a common consensus and a common understanding, and the grade level teams are agreeing to to move in a certain direction. I don't think things are being lost. I think we're just trying to prioritize really where our kids need to be, and that's the work we've been doing for the past 20 months.
And I think the follow-up to that, I wasn't necessarily as worried about what was being lost, but more worried about, again, I'm going back to how are you doing? Because there were some things that struck a chord, almost like the rubric of, okay, now, here's how do you communicate this, and what do you think they're thinking? And I'm listening to each one of you, and I'm kind of thinking, how are you guys doing, and how are you thinking? And you're moving. I'm very impressed, and I can't thank you enough, because this is a lot. And I'm just sitting here hearing all of these tools and techniques, and the families that are listening are hearing these techniques. So you've already kind of shared some things, that I didn't know about. But I just can't thank you enough, because I know you have a lot on your plates. And it's very impressive, the level of detail, and to take the time out and to give us this kind of report I'm just really appreciative.
Thank you.
Said it all.
Yeah. I do. Just a couple thoughts. One, I'm a big picture comparison guy. I would love to see sort of the reason for counseling over the last couple of years and see maybe where that has ebbed and flowed. And to that point, I find it unique that Habermas sort of had different reasons for counseling versus the other two. And they were strong in that emotional component where behavior and anxiety was very strong in Habermas, as well as their crisis management. That seemed to be a high component for them. Just curious if we're seeing anything different at that dynamic versus the other two, and why those numbers sort of represented that way.
So some of the behavioral pieces, I don't know if you want to talk about kind of the substantially separate programs that are at Habermas. And I'll talk about kind of in a minute, I can go into this and kind of lead into the next pieces, is really about, especially at the elementary level, students that may not have those coping skills to manage those emotions. At the secondary level, that may be something where they're stressed, or they can verbalize kind of to guidance or to social workers. At elementary, it often comes out kind of physically, whether that's dysregulation, that's behavioral choices, temper tantrums. And that's what we see at the elementary level. Some of our substantially separate programs, students are struggling as well. Again, kind of even though they were here 4 days last year in kind of cohort C, it still was different, and they still had a day at home. So that's a piece of it, because our social workers and our school psychologists do work with our substantially separate students as well that may have more behavioral needs and supports.
Yeah, I just didn't know if that is reflected. Do we need to look at more resources there or ways to support that? Because it did kind of stuck out at me a little bit there.
Yeah, we've talked actually at the building-based level about providing some opportunities starting in kindergarten and first grade about actually getting into the classroom. So both Mr. Lisi and Mrs. Terrio about getting into the classrooms and running, just little like mini seminars, if you will, on if you're feeling anxious, it's okay. That's just kind of a sign of what's going on in your body. And then, once the kids understand that that's an okay feeling to have, you can kind of, start unpacking about here are some things you can kind of do as a class or as an individual to be able to do it. So I think it's really kind of getting in and talking to kids like on the ground. That's where it's at.
Well, and I just want to echo thank you to all of you guys and to the district. These are unique times. I was an educator many years back, and the things that we deal with currently, it's a different world. And the supports that the district and the team has to now provide it's a new world. So I appreciate the flexibility and the adaptation, and we know the students are better for it. So thank you.
Great. Thank you again. Say what everybody else said. I think what you're doing is great work. What concerns me is what you're not able to do because you're having to do all this. And that is the part that potentially has as much of a long-term impact, negative impact to us as some of these things do if not treated. And it's not because you're not wanting to do some of those, and it's not just you, it's across the table. It's not because people don't want to do it. We don't have the capacity right now, right? Because you're dealing with other things, and that's unfortunately, I think, one of the things that we're going to look at as a potential longer-term problem, right? Right, we're dealing with this, we know you can see it, you know what to do, diagnosing and addressing, but what are the things we're not doing that we would have been doing in a, hate to use the word, but normal year. So thank you for doing this, and I think as we go forward, we have to start thinking about what those things are and how that starts to look. Otherwise, we won't be where I think we all want to be or need to be. So, but great job. This was a great presentation. As I was trying to make.
Still a tiny piece left. That's just gonna
Just
answer.
most of the stuff I've talked about kind of in general, but this leads into kind of Lance, in addition to kind of the counseling and the social work and some of the reasons for services, we also saw over the last couple of years an increase in requests by teams or families for what's called functional behavioral assessments. So those are assessments completed by a board-certified behavior analyst. And as you've probably heard me talk about, we contract with Pilgrim Area Collaborative, and we have for a certain amount of hours per week. Outside of that, our requests both at school and home when we have kind of exhausted our skill set of our general ed support, so our social workers, sometimes even our school psychologists, in order to be able to figure out a function of a behavior. At the secondary level last year, we saw school avoidance, so there was school phobia that some of the time we were recommending an assessment done in home to try to figure out a plan in order to get kids back in school. And at the elementary level, it could have been engagement, it could have been, again, the ability to kind of regulate themselves and attend. So we saw that increase. With those increases of assessments, a lot of those assessments resulted in increased services for students in special education. So as you can see from 2 years ago, students that had actual services in their IEP by a behaviorist. So that is a board certified, a BCBA, that would come and work consulting either directly with a teacher or a team or working with a student. So you can see the increase, and then the same at home as well. So it's almost doubled in the last couple of years of services that happen in the home, whether by direct service providers, which are, and I'll talk about RBTs in a minute, or the BCBAs. And kind of, our next steps, and we have Erin talked a little bit about this already at this level in regards to the special ed grants that we were given. So the ARP grants were impact of COVID, special education, and we wrote and were given grants in order to fund, as Donna was talking about, that 0.5 social worker at the middle school. And in addition, we're going to be expanding our kind of behavioral consultation model, especially at that elementary level in particular. So kind of working that way, those pieces into what we already do, so our tiered kind of monitoring support. So we have that for academics, and then we also have that through IST, through those instructional support teams. So teachers or counselors, principals would refer a child to that support team. Typically tier 1 in kind of social emotional behavioral support happens in the classroom. So there might be strategies come up with by the team for the teacher to implement. We often talk about the district accommodation plan. So those are accommodations that any child can receive in the classroom, but it may take a team to kind of come up with some of those recommendations. Typically those happen in the room by the general ed teacher. And then there's a period of time where you implement the strategies and look at the response to it. So then the team meets again. At times, then we move on to kind of tier 2, which is sometimes our social worker, psychologist, in and out of the classroom. And again, this is not just special education. It could lead to special education, which is why we kind of built it in through our instructional support team model, which the old term is called a referral team for special education. And then tier 3 would be the additional supports through this grant. So this week we started, we are staffing a behaviorist, so it's kind of a step down from a BCBA, but still with the same skill set. So that person started this week, and they have 3 days a week in our district. So they're going to be supporting kind of referral teams. I'm working with some of the team chairs. We've created kind of a process and a referral form for those teams to refer that, they've exhausted tier 1 and tier 2, and we really need somebody more with an expertise in behavior to come in, do observations, consult, possibly come up with a behavior plan, model strategies in classrooms, et cetera. We talk about kind of, exhausting, Susie, we worry about exhausting our staff. These are some additional resources for people to come in, one fresh set of eyes, different skill set to be able to support. And underneath the behaviorist, it's what's called an RBT, so a registered behavior technician. So that is more of a paraprofessional level, but has specific training and works directly under our BCBA. So they would carry out behavior plans either written by a behaviorist or our BCBA and work directly with students and staff in classroom. So next week we start our first RBT, I'm sorry. That person's going to be with us 4 days a week, primarily starting at the elementary level, as that's really where the need has surfaced right now, and working directly with students and teams to implement behavior plans and be able to kind of model for our staff, both general ed, special ed, et cetera. And that kind of process is going to be shared out kind of to the building level administrators and teams this week. I'm meeting tomorrow with the new behaviorist, and then next week with the RBT. So those are some of the pieces. And what I didn't include in here, but thought about as you guys were talking about kind of parent supports is in this grant I did outline some allocated funds for CPAC. So at one of our meetings, they were talking about professional development. Typically, we always bring in district staff based on their kind of surveying needs. It could be anxiety, it could be homework help, reading strategies, and it really comes from parents. But they were looking for, in addition, maybe some outside expertise and providing professional development for parents as well, not just district staff. So I did allocate a good amount of money in one of the grants and shared that with Tracy Marino. They haven't had a meeting since, so they can discuss how they want to do that and some of their ideas. And then we also allocated some professional development money along that behavioral special ed piece for our in-district staff too.
They just moved the meeting, I saw, right?
Yeah, so, yes. So they did their professional rights and responsibilities. They had the Federation come in and do that. And then their next meeting is actually going to be more of a parent support group. So not a formalized meeting, but like in someone's home, more informal. So they're kind of going to alternate the way they're going to do that.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but thank you.
No, I think.
Any last questions, comments?
And that's it. I talked about this already.
Yeah.
So just the professional development that we coordinated with Rebus to come in and do some of that impact of the trauma of COVID. So we started that in August, and we meet again in November.
Can we, as we look forward, and I was making some notes on future agenda items, we can talk about this a little bit later, but can we put this particular one now, I'll give you a few other ones later, can we put a social emotional update with regard to overall and then impact to the budget early in the budget process, probably second January meeting? Expecting us to get do the initial budget, first budget overview, the first meeting in January? And actually, while we're on it, now, can we look at last year's budget calendar, all the sessions we did, and just put them on the future agenda items, but then the dates TBD, and include, if we could put something, an item for school calendar and school choice. School choice will be April, we know that one, but then we can at least start working on planning it out. It'll be easier that way, I think, I hope. I know hope is not a strategy. It is, yeah, it is. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you very much, and
You're more
please
than
thank
welcome. Yes.
all
Donna,
of your
thank you
mental
so
health
much.
staff as well.
Yes, yep. Everybody else can go, but Donna, you can do the quick list.
We should all stay in solidarity.
Actually, yeah. Well, you do need, kind of do need to stay for the other items, but want to do a quick update on the middle school lockers?
Yes. So just wanted to give a quick update. I think as I, does that work?
She's gonna start walking around now.
As I mentioned in September, I would look at introducing lockers when the colder weather was coming. So Here we are. So we will be assigning student lockers probably at the beginning of term 2, only because at the end of a term, there's lots of makeups, and they're kind of cramming right now, and Titan time is worth gold. So once we get past term 1, we'll have time to kind of get the kids acclimated, assign them lockers. They could lease a combination lock for $5. They give us $5. They get a lock, which isn't required, but if they want to use a lock, they have to use our lock, and then we give them back the $5 at the end of the year. If they return the lock, which doesn't always happen, but if they return the lock, they get it back. And kids will be able to come and kind of drop off their gear in the morning during homeroom. If there's any school materials they don't need all day, they can leave it in their locker, but any school materials they need, they should have in their backpack. And then at the end of the day, they will be able to pick up their stuff or drop off any gear, materials, or whatever they need at the end of the day before they go out on buses. Also, kind of in combination with that, I had my teachers, the Titan Time teachers, take a look at backpacks, and I've been take a look at students. Some of them actually examined backpacks, but some of them felt more comfortable just asking students about their backpacks. And what we were finding is a lot of kids had bought like really big binders, kind of anticipating middle school, and they got like 3-inch binders, and they brought in like 1,000 sheets of loose paper, and we appreciate, the eagerness of that, but it did add to the bulk, with also the computer and their regular school supplies. So I purchased a bunch of 1-inch and 1.5-inch binders. I did colors because I thought that would be a little more enticing. And then the Titan Time teachers, when they surveyed the students, indicated how many kind of binders they wanted and offered to switch out students, so just trying to reduce the size of it. In the next year, we will be very specific about the size of the binder. And then what we're going to need to do is make sure teachers kind of get into the rotation of cleaning out binders. Some students have trouble letting go, and they're afraid that you never know when this worksheet may kind of come up and really be needed. Other kids are better at letting go. So also helping teachers be like, okay, everything from this term now put this we don't need this. So we just keep the binder as a tool that is going to be more helpful for them.
On the theme of communication, when you communicate that, when you communicate the timing of assigning lockers,
Yes.
can you also give a backpack tips?
Sure.
Yeah,
no, definitely, I can.
I'm not saying it, I'm just saying,
No.
right, what should be in there?
Right.
What shouldn't be
Right.
be in there?
Not
Right?
2,000 sheets of paper.
Right. Or like 4,500 pencils. Like,
Yeah.
they just have huge amounts of like everything, or like,
Yeah.
so and again, the letting go is
Just
a
a
process.
reminder,
Given to them.
because,
Yes.
I mean, we all know the child with the backpack that is heavier than a rock.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to,
No, I think that's a great idea. So I'll update the families next week about the timelines, about the locker, about all of that piece, and about what should be in backpacks, and about cleaning out.
you'd think they know, but they still don't know.
No, they go to the middle school, it's a lot, right? There's a lot to shift in. It's 50% new for us, but it's 100% new for parents, so it's a lot to wade through at the beginning. So appreciate the tips, actually. Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Will there be, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Will there be like an opportunity maybe at lunchtime or Titan time to go back to the locker, like for maybe?
I don't know. Like at this point, we're in lunch we're a lot of us in lunch most of the time. I want to kind of wait and see what it looks. I want to really help them have it at homeroom at the end of the day, and then see what lunch can look like. But right now, we're trying to be in the halls when they're at lunch because we're finding some kids wandering a little bit. So I just want to. So I guess I'll do a shorter answer. Maybe. How's that?
Great.
That's it.
Question? Okay. The DESE,
Can you do it? It's like, while
Sure.
principals are here, there are a couple of questions in the box that I'm happy to share some preliminary answers to. The first one is about parent-teacher conferences. So obviously last Wednesday was the first occurrence of parent-teacher conferences at the secondary level. There was no power, those were canceled. So there's a lot of questions about when they'll be rescheduled. Looking at it right now, parent-teacher conferences, the second occurrence of them at the secondary level is on the calendar for November 17th. That's the evening conferences. I think the time changed a little bit to 3:30 to 7:30. We are looking at rescheduling the second date for secondary conferences to be the same early release day in December that the first night of elementary conferences are. So, it's important to have a balance between afternoon and evening offerings for families depending on their schedules. We don't have a lot of half days in our schedule, so we do want to be mindful of trying to give a similar type time slot experience for families to access. So at this point, we are looking to reschedule them for December 8th. Next question in the box. A question about technology at the high school in particular. So I think one of the other future agenda items should be a tech update. We have had some troubles the past few weeks with our wireless network. I'm happy to say, knocking on this fake-looking wood desk, that those difficulties have been resolved, but we are not running the Titan wireless network at the high school at this time. So students have access on the district-issued Chromebooks to our wireless network, but their phone is not able to access the Titan network. What the technology department was finding was that there were some students using a VPN access through Titan Wireless, which was disrupting the signal to our wireless. So Brandon and his staff have been feverishly working to resolve those issues. We do anticipate bringing Titan Wireless back online in the coming weeks, but it is not available to students right now. They do have access to the internet through their school-issued device, just not their cell phones at this time. So we will do a bigger update for tech in the coming weeks.
Anything else? Is that it?
That's it for now. That's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to move on to the DESE masking update. As Karen gets the presentation ready, just to think everybody is aware that DESE extended the mask mandate through January 15th of 2022. There is still the waiver process for schools that have 80% a vaccination rate of 80% or more. We're in the process right now of getting affidavits from parents, which are required by DESE in order to apply for the waiver. I think as of last week, there were 5 schools that had applied. One school started it yesterday, right? So 5 applied and got approved, I think is the number, roughly. But one school, Hopkinton, I think, high school, went on a 3-week trial. So they'll revisit after Thanksgiving, or right around Thanksgiving, of whether they'll continue it or not. So Erin's going to be showing us, and I'm trying to make sure I frame it as much as we can. She's going to give us our updates on where we are as far as our percentages. Just to recap for people, remember, we approved the gathering of the data, and obviously when we get to the 80%, we would make the decision to go for the waiver, potentially or not, but we're at least getting the data that we need in order to go forward. If not, you don't have the data, you can't go forward. And just for what it's worth, I think I heard breaking news as I was leaving that the FDA approved the 5 through 12 vaccine, one of them.
It just
Is
came
that
up
true?
on my phone.
It just came out tonight,
Yeah.
the Pfizer one, okay.
CDC approves the Pfizer COVID vaccine for kids aged 5 to 11.
Yeah, so, what that means, I don't know. I mean, it does impact, I think, at North different because, right, we have some 4-year-olds in that population. Because of the preschool, that could potentially impact, right, because the numbers, it makes the rest of the school population have to get higher if we're going to get to elementary school. Like, anticipating the question at some point at the elementary level now.
Right, and that's not necessarily, so remember that the DESE requirement is that students age 5 and higher
True.
mask, so. We have all of our students masking, but the DESE requirement is age 5 and higher.
Yeah.
I think you gave away most of the presentation, so this will be fast.
It took you long enough. It's
I know.
good. See, it's a good thing I paid.
You see what I'm working with?
Yeah.
So again, on October 26th, the DESE extended its masking requirement through January 15th, 2022. As Mike said, districts with a vaccination rate of 80% or higher may apply for the waiver. DESE began accepting waivers on October 15th. As Mike said, Hopkinton High School was the first district to successfully secure a waiver. Westboro Middle School and Westboro High School also have. Those are the only 3 public schools. There's 2 special ed private schools that have also secured a waiver. That was as of last Tuesday, and there are 5 more schools in the pipeline, 5 more public schools where they're in the waiver process now. Again, they have to be on a school-by-school basis, and the way that the numbers are determined are by the students and staff that spend the majority of their time in a building. So for us, when I get to, I think it's the next slide, when we're talking about, this is the vaccination, ooh, that does not look nice, the municipal vaccination rate data that we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks, and how it is slightly misleading when you're looking at the 12 to 15-year-old population and the 16 to 19-year-old population, understanding that those populations, especially the 12 to 15, could be middle school or high school, and that 16 to 19-year-olds could be in our high school or could have graduated. And the town municipal numbers do include all students, regardless of whether or not they attend Pembroke public schools or not. So charter school students, private school students, homeschool students, all of those students are captured in these numbers. So if you're looking at the municipal report, it looks as though we're far surpassed the 80% mark with our 16 to 19 population, and I think it's 67% for our 12 to 15 population. That is not our actual data. So as I explained at our last meeting, when students are vaccinated, their vaccination record is entered into the MIIS state database. That database does sync with our school health software known as SNAP. So our nurses are able to access pretty regularly how many students in the building have been vaccinated. So this is our actual data. So when you look at the middle school, we have obviously 7th and 8th grade there. Our special ed transition program, so our 18 to 22-year-old population, is also housed at the middle school, so those students would count towards that vaccination rate. So at the middle school, our current vaccination rate as of this morning is 54.5%. At the high school, again, that 16 to 19-year-olds age group is not necessarily representative of those that are in our high school. We're at 69.1%. So the numbers are a little bit different.
Oh.
Yeah. So it went down at the middle school level because this is fully vaccinated students. What you have there are students that have received a first dose. So there's about a 4% difference there. When we last met, you all discussed when and if we would be collecting staff data, and we said when student vaccination rate got to 70%, we would start to get staff data. So I anticipate beginning to reach out to staff at the high school towards the end of this week to collect their vaccination data, because we're pretty much at the 70% at the high school. There is no automated way for us to collect it at this point. Obviously, we don't have access through the MIIS database for employee data. It is truly going to be a self-attestation from staff, similar to what we had our students do initially when there was a glitch in the state reporting system. Talking about attestations, that is still an option out there for folks. There is a lag between when you are vaccinated and when it is uploaded in the MIIS database. So if your student has been vaccinated in the past couple of days and you want to go in and fill out the self-attestation, we can use that also for the numbers. Right now, we have 490 families or students that have filled out the self-attestation, so that's only a 41% response rate on that. So the information from the database is far more accurate than our self-attestations.
But at least it gets close. Just to put it, if I did the math correctly, we would need to increase the middle school by 108.
The middle school has to be 338 and the high school has to be 622.
Oh, I did the math right, good.
Yep.
That means we're 85 short at the
Yep.
high school and 108 short at the middle school.
Keep in mind that the student and staff number are added together. So if the staff number is 92%, then the student number can be a little bit lower than 80% and vice versa.
Questions on this at all?
Does the staff have to share the number?
They don't, and so I think that's an important point to talk about. And if you have no life like some of us at the table and follow other community school committee meetings, that is some of what's happening in other communities, is that the student population is at 80%, but the staff are not self-certifying as vaccinated because they do want students to continue to wear masks. So I know that Cohasset is an example of the student population being well over the 80%, but the staff number is dragging it down below. When we surveyed staff here in Pembroke earlier in the summer, well, even in the spring, around their intent to get vaccinated and then their vaccination status, we believe we're at 82 to 85% vaccinated for our staff, but we don't have, obviously, the certification of that, so.
How many staff do we have that aren't considered in the building the majority of the time that would fall in this? Is that like, And if that's going to divulge anything that breaks
Right,
any
no,
rules,
so
don't
it's,
tell me.
they just outline the rules so that I can't count Jess, myself, and Mary Beth as part of the vaccinated staff at the high school. We may spend a day there over the course.
Okay, gotcha.
Mark obviously would count towards it. It's, in the building itself, there's a couple of teachers that shift between, like, Greg Tarbox teaches a portion of the time at the high school and a portion of the time in other buildings.
Like Mr. Hawes goes from building to building.
Right. I mean, he's all elementary. There's not a lot of secondary shared staff, but we would obviously be including everybody that we can.
Thank you.
So again, we're going to start collecting the staff vaccination attestations this week for PHS staff. It'll look almost identical to the student attestation that I shared with you, because I do believe over the course of the next 3 days, the students will get to 70%. And then beginning on 11/5, I think it would be helpful if we start to add this information to our COVID dashboard. So updating it every Friday with kind of where we're at, so people can see at a glance kind of where we're moving at towards that target.
And Erin, just for informational purposes, the link to that attestation form is in the weekly update?
Right, it's right on our website as a tab, but it's also been in the weekly updates that have been coming out from the schools.
Any other questions on this one? Okay. So in your packet, you have a consideration for first read for a masking discipline policy. Just to kind of give a little bit of background, Erin and I met with a group of parents, had a really good discussion a couple weeks ago now. I think time flies, I don't even remember when. But it was within the past couple weeks, just talking about some concerns around masking and things like that. Some pieces around discipline, but overall, masking in general, like I said, it was a really good discussion we had. They had asked us if we would consider adopting a specific policy with regard to behavior or discipline around masking. The way the DESE guideline or mandate is written, it allows you to have a separate policy. Now, we had been following and using it with regard to school readiness had been the way we had been adopting the policy, or we adopted discipline. Erin can talk about how few student cases we've had over the year, which has been great, but just to get some consistency, they asked. Now, in that, Erin did reach out to the Lighthouse superintendents. There are 41?
There are 42 of us.
42.
And there's no district that has a policy specific for masking violations. Everybody in the group, and though it's called South Shore Superintendents, it includes Mansfield. It's a little bit far-reaching than South Shore. Everybody is using the school readiness language that's identified in their current student handbooks.
Yeah, I also reached out, I'll get it. I reached out to, they have a group of these are just South Shore school committees, a member or two from different committees in the area. There's about 20 different communities represented, and nobody had something different that responded. Hingham was the only one who responded, and they go by school readiness. But usually, if somebody has something to say, they will share, especially a few communities. So it doesn't look like anybody's doing anything different. So the question for the committee, before we go deep into it, does anyone have an interest in looking at a face covering policy with regard to discipline? I think where we are as far as coverings and following the DESE guidelines, so as DESE moves, we move. We don't have to wait for a vote or anything like that. We have a tremendous amount of flexibility there. But do we want to look at discipline in general for masking differently than school readiness?
Can I just ask a question around it? Like, so I don't really understand, like, by creating a policy, how much different this would even be. Like, what's the point of doing it? Like, maybe there is a point, and maybe it's just because I'm just new and don't understand.
All right,
but-
so there's definitely a couple of different purposes for for creating such a policy. I think, for clear expectations between students, families, teachers, administrators, that's one reason to do it. I think the conversation we had with the parent group in particular was more along the lines of de-stressing the masking as such an important factor, and, kind of trying to articulate that, yes, we are of course going to continue to give students verbal reminders about proper mask wearing. When those reminders would happen, as you can see in just the draft that I put together, is kind of during common passing times and not during instructional time. So you've heard at your meetings for the past couple of times some student and parent experience with teachers potentially stopping a lesson to remind a class to put their mask up. And so in an effort to minimize those disruptions, the parents that we've talked with were hoping that we would say that we're no longer going to stop instruction for that to happen. I am in no way, shape, or form advocating for that. I do think that creates a whole potential bucket of issues that are not addressed by a policy. So we're talking about student and staff safety in the building. We're talking about, loosely interpreting a mandate. All of those things have repercussions, whether it's with collective bargaining, whether it's with specific families of students that have specific medical needs. What you have in your packet is just kind of a first pass at putting something in writing. There's a couple of other roadblocks that you'd have to get through. So the way that policy naming works is that the policy for face coverings is EBCFA. The way the regulations for it would work would be EBCFA-R. We don't have EBCFA. We don't have a face covering policy. It was rescinded back in April of last year. So you'd be creating a set of regulations to a policy that doesn't exist here. And then even that, those of you that read through what's in the packet, on top of this would be procedures. And so procedures aren't outlined in a policy. So what does this look like in the building? So Mark would have a staff meeting and say to staff, we're no longer going to stop instruction to remind students to wear masks. That's not something that would ever be articulated in a policy. That would be a building procedure. And I'm not sure that our staff is comfortable with not having that level of authority in their classroom. I think it's a big ask of people. I do 100% understand where the parents were coming from, because as I've said before, and I'll continue to say, all we've given at this point is verbal reminders. There has not been a detention, there has not been a suspension, there has not been an in-school, there hasn't been any of that. And that's a similar experience all along the South Shore. There wasn't one superintendent that has had anything other than a verbal warning for a student regarding mask wearing. But there is definitely a level of frustration in our buildings from our staff around proper mask wearing, and again, from our students from being asked to wear a mask. This is the only place where they need to wear a mask. I think Mark and I were talking about it earlier today. Kids are going off to sports without a mask. Like they're just not used to wearing it anymore. So some of our students do need several reminders over the course of the day on what proper mask wearing looks like.
Is there I'm just trying to understand, is there are you getting parent complaints about specific multiple complaints about one teacher interrupting the class?
No,
there
was
I'm
just
trying to
kind of general.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges one of the challenges we heard, and I think we've experienced, is clearly this is relatively new,
Yeah.
right? As far as what we're supposed to be doing, as far as mask mandates and mask wearing and all this other stuff, right? We've talked about it for 20 months, but it's relatively new stuff. I think we struggle, maybe not just in this, in some things, with consistency. You're right. We talked about this a little bit in the last meeting, right? We're talking about potentially 200 different classes or sections, whatever, or more actually, right? It looks a little bit different. And how do we get to a more consistent message around what it should be and what it shouldn't be? That, I think, is one. The second is making sure it's not punitive punishment or discipline. Right. I think we're trying to do that. I mean, we talked about a little bit with discipline in the social emotional piece, right? Discipline shouldn't be punitive. It has to be, right? You're trying to change behavior.
Yeah.
So I think those are where some of the concerns lie, which is why we look to see, okay, is there a change we can make? If there's a change we can make, or how do we model that after somebody who's made the change? No one has done what we were considering. The question is if we do, I guess the way I look at this is if we do, there's a few things. Number one, can we get it actually done before the things change?
Yeah.
Hopefully, knock on wood, depending the 80% or January 15th or something else, right? I didn't look at today's numbers, but numbers seem to be heading in the right direction, at least statewide. Even our numbers in town, school numbers are non-existent almost. Can we get something done in time? And then if we do, get it done in time, does it actually have an impact, or can we do something else that would have an equal impact sooner?
Yeah.
And hopefully that didn't ramble, but.
No, I think that makes sense. I just, I'm you know, to go through all of this and make this big change, like that, we are already dealing with so much, as evidenced today by the social emotional piece. And I just feel like if we're gonna go through a big policy, like, is there something we can do instead that will sort of, you know, like, maybe everybody just has a talk with the teachers about, you know, consistency and like, so that.
Right, which is part of what we talked about the last time is, you know, mask wearing adherence for staff needs to be the same as we're expecting of students.
Right.
That message went to folks. I think, you know, using respectful language when we're reminding students about proper mask wearing, none of the, I know a toddler that wears it better than you kind of engagement, more around the fact that,
Yeah.
you know, just kind of, guys, got to cover your nose and your mouth or pull your mask up, which is a lot of what we see and hear when we're in the buildings. And I know that this is really new, but this concept isn't new. Mark, how many times prior to COVID do you remind a kid to take their hood off or to take their hat off, right?
Right.
It's the earbud, it's the same, it's school readiness,
Yeah.
it's those reminders. The enforcement of it is not new, it's just what we're enforcing is a little bit different.
Well, and Aaron, I think to that point, I think maybe that's where Sue's coming from, is there a need for a policy versus improving communication or more of that front? Because
Some
things
sort of
aren't,
small
to
compromise.
Mike's point, is things are gonna evolve so quickly on us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, so I don't believe there's a
And
need.
especially being the first out of, hearing, we would be the first out of 42 districts.
Cutting edge here,
Ma-
remember?
Yeah, cutting edge, but again, shows perhaps maybe there's not a need. So
Right,
I hear the feedback
So-
that the parents are sharing, so is there ways we can address that versus having to do a
Right, and I
policy
do
for it?
think it's faculty meeting conversations, just saying with teachers, again, the expectation is this, which, you know, I think they understand that they're supposed to be wearing the masks. If students are wearing their masks, there's much less of that happening, but just the way that we're reminding students. Let's do it in a way that's as least disruptive to an entire lesson as possible. If there's a kid in your class that just consistently cannot wear their mask appropriately, just send them down to Mark, Dave, or Kristen, or to Donna, or Tom, or to Mike, or Jen, and let the administration handle it. Don't create a larger disruption in your class. And when I say let the administration handle it, you know, what that looks like is a reiteration of expectations. You know, nobody's getting suspended, nobody's getting a detention, it's just, you know, it's.
Yeah, I think, just to make it, I guess, a little bit clearer, because, yeah, is it needed? No, but do we need to do something, I think, is a yes.
Right.
Right?
Agreed,
Because we
yeah.
can accomplish the same, we can get to the
Correct.
same outcome by doing it a lot easier, like, a lot
Exactly.
easier.
That's-
That's, I
yeah.
think, what we're trying to get to. And again, when we had the discussion, it was something we took away.
Right, and we said we'd absolutely look at it, and I
Yeah.
think by starting to look at it and gather information, it just really answer the question of do we need it, and I don't think we do, right? So what you put in a policy isn't going to change what it looks like in the building. It's a conversation with staff, it's a culture, it's an environment. That's what changes the student experience, not the vagueness like you have here of a policy.
Because we could end up creating a bigger or a different problem.
Right.
Right? I don't know whether it's bigger or smaller, but I think, anyway, what I would suggest from hearing this discussion and from thinking about it over the past couple of weeks and having come to some conversation with Erin, is we definitely need to close the loop with that group, because we said we were gonna do something, we did a lot of it, but we need to close the loop and say, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to instruct, and this is what it should look like at the building level, going forward. Because, yeah, we heard some of the comments that were made, and I don't think they were intended to come across as I hate to use a word, but they come across as being mean. But when you think about it, they could be perceived as that, right, by the person receiving the message. So, again, I don't think anybody's trying to do anything to be difficult or hard or anything like that. I think it's just it's a tough situation. I mean, as Erin said, this is the only place you're required to mask. I'll leave it at that.
I mean, families have gone through so much, and it's so emotional right now, and I can understand why parents are upset, and I am too, you know, like it's difficult that these kids If you're somebody who doesn't want your child to wear a mask, it's a very difficult thing. And if you're somebody who does want your child to wear a mask, it's a difficult thing. Everybody, it's a very emotional time in
And same
history.
for staff.
Yeah,
Same
and for staff.
You know, it's COVID fatigue.
Yeah, exactly,
You know,
exactly.
I don't think the staff wants to have to say anything any more than the students want to
Right.
have something said or to have to be reminded. I
Right.
think and like Mark said with the hats, I mean, I hear about, like, you know, the hoods or whatever, you know, you hear about it from different ones. So it's a different reminder, but I think it's within the structure of what we currently have. It can be handled within that. And I think patience, leading with kindness and patience with everybody involved is going to win the day. And we have a very patient and kind staff. We have a tremendous student body. And I think within our current structure, we can address it and satisfy, I think, those that were concerned and hopefully alleviate the situation.
So why don't we take it as far as what we'll do is we'll draft something with regard to the way we're going to communicate so that we can share what we're going to do and then execute on that. Does that sound fair? Especially the people who have to execute on it? It's easy for us to say it, but then you have to.
Yeah, and I
live
mean,
it
they
and
have
say.
been. We had this
Yeah.
conversation a couple weeks ago just around some of the experiences that were shared, and that's not the experience we want kids to be having. And, you know, sometimes it's a staff fear, and, you know, is there something we can do to support that staff member better?
Yeah.
You know, it may come across as aggressive reminders, but it's usually coming from a place of fear.
Yep.
In a good place, so.
Yeah, absolutely, not underestimating either side of it.
Right.
Right, because I think it's important, so.
There's one question in the box just asking what the percentage of actual COVID cases in the school system is this year. So we've had 57 student cases out of 2,690 students. That's just about 2% of students that have tested positive. We have far less staff. I think it's less than 1% of staff that have
And
tested positive.
None of those cases were.
There's no school-based transmission or spread. We currently, the dashboard is not updated yet tonight, there's currently just one active student case and one active staff case here in Pembroke. As Mike said, the data for the past couple of days have been 2s for most of the days, which is a trend obviously in the right direction. The other part to this question is if you don't get to the 80%, what's the next plan? Will masking just keep getting extended more? I don't know the answer to that. I do know that there's been steps at the state level to disband and dismantle some of the supports in place associated with COVID. So some of you heard Lisa Cullity talking at one of the Board of Health meetings that the state is saying they're disbanding the contact tracing unit as of December 31st, which means the state will no longer be contact tracing COVID cases. I think that's definitely one step towards, recognizing that there could be an end in sight, but there is not necessarily, again, sharing the news about the Pfizer vaccine for 5 to 11 is another step that seemed to be one of the goalposts that we were looking to get to as far as masking, but we don't have any information at the state level on whether it will get extended past the January 15th or not.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we're at the end. Is there questions? Yep, go ahead, Rob.
Hi, good evening. Maureen J.C., West Elm Street. Nice to see you all tonight. There's so much I want to say. I'll try to be quick. First, thank you. Thank you to all the staff that you, principals, all detailed. To all of you, if you're listening, just thank you for all the empathy and care and love that you're giving to all the students in this crisis that we're experiencing. Thank you to allowing the kids to have the most normal homecoming with the weather that they possibly could. I happen to be out of town somewhere nearby and talking to another woman whose child's in Norwell, and she was just blown away that Pembroke was having a homecoming and how wonderful it was because Norwell is experiencing a little bit more restrictive experience. So thank you. It was very enlightening to see the report that you all did and the amount of mental health that the school district does have to provide to a lot of the students. It was interesting to observe that the word mask mandate was never addressed in that report. I don't know if that was intentional because it's just assumed or it's not being considered? Or I'm curious why that wasn't, is it just assumed that that's why we're talking about the mental health? Because the children are wearing the mask? Or I don't want to make that assumption that you guys didn't mention it because of that. So if you could just speak to that, how that's affecting the mental health, the mandate?
Right, so I think what the information that the principal shared was the reasons for the interventions that our social workers and our school psychologists are seeing. I don't think that there's necessarily any student that is receiving services because of a mask mandate or is seeking out support specifically for a mask mandate. I think obviously anxiety, school readiness, school phobia, some of that, masking has a piece of that.
I guess as a trigger, if you
Right,
were
I
the
don't
word.
necessarily think that's the sole reason why a student is presenting in need of support, that's all.
Interesting. Okay. Another question. In the evenings, I remember a couple meetings back that you were saying, like, if we rent out the facilities or something, that those organizations don't need to mask. Pembroke Youth Basketball uses North Gym at times. Am I right in assuming that logic applies to them as well?
So Pembroke Youth Basketball has the ability to put into place whatever safety restrictions they choose. We are not requiring outside groups to mask in our building outside of school-sponsored events, and Pembroke Youth Basketball is not a school-sponsored event.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm that because the boys were that would be under the jurisdiction of that program if they
Yes.
wish to do that.
And I can say I have seen kids here. I think girl tryouts were last week or the week before, girls basketball, and the students were masked. I would assume that's coming from youth sports. It's not coming from us.
Great, great.
That
Thank
doesn't
you.
mean that won't change when the MIA gives us regulations for,
But they wouldn't be MIA.
I think youth
Yeah.
sports are going to end up falling
Okay.
under, like it did last year, wherever the MIA goes for indoor sports. But again, we've got a couple weeks before they're going to give us any guidance whatsoever.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Have a good night. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Great. Anything else? Okay, good. All right.
There's one more question in the box. I'm going to say it out loud. I'm going to let you answer it.
Me?
Yep. I'm happy to answer it, but I think it should
No,
come from the
kidding.
chair.
I'm kidding.
Are there extensive measurements and metrics, including surveys of the students and the parents for teacher performance across the district? Is there a presentation at one of the monthly meetings during the school year, if not twice a year?
So on teacher performance.
Right.
So that gets under education reform. It's the Education Reform Act from 96, 8?
92.
92, 90,
92.
92, reaffirmed in 2015, I believe. So the Education Reform Act took let me rephrase it. It put all of the responsibility for performance evaluations, hiring, firing, away from school districts and put it completely in the hands mainly of the building principal. So the building principal is the one responsible technically for hiring, firing. The only individual that the school committee can evaluate is the superintendent, and the only individuals that we can hire are the superintendent, the business manager, the director of special education. With regard to teacher performance or evaluating a teacher, that is solely the responsibility of the school principal or somebody in the administration, where they do it through, and you can look within the teacher contract as far as what they're able to do as far as evaluations. I'm not even going to,
Right, we've given some presentations in the past, just
But
kind
how-
of globally talking about
announced and
exemplary,
unannounced, yeah.
how many observations were done, how many teachers are proficient, how many people are on improvement plans. Happy to give you that information if that's a future agenda item that you guys would like to look at. It usually happens closer to the spring or the end of the school
Yeah.
year, since we're just really starting the goal setting and observation process with staff now.
absolutely, the only, so there's, and I'll.
We don't
Mary
gather
Beth, can you talk-
feedback.
Yeah, can you talk about,
surveying students and perhaps parents, which we don't tend to do so much, but teachers do collect information from students regarding how they think the year went, how they think the unit went, so there is feedback from students. Part of the evaluation process is for teachers to have evidence of student feedback on the work that they're doing in the classroom. That's generally treated as a private matter. That's not generally something we collect and publicize, but it's certainly something that the principals, content supervisors, and other evaluators are aware of.
Yeah, and not to, hopefully I'm answering the question. I don't even know which way to look either. I don't know which camera I'm looking at. But the only other thing I would say, if there is a concern over misconduct by any staff member, and that, I mean, literally any staff member, there is obviously somebody you should go to. If it's a teacher, you should go to the building principal. And if it's an administrator, you would go to the superintendent. Every issue that has been brought that has at least made it to this table, obviously in an executive session, is taken very seriously, right? Because we're talking about the care and well-being of students, of children. I'm confident that with the administrators we have at this table, and the one who's not, if there was something brought up with serious misconduct, that it would be investigated. Now, in some cases, we don't know about those situations because just the way the reporting goes and potentially legal ramifications, non-legal ramifications, some of those come to us. You'll see us sometimes go into executive session. Sometimes, clearly, it would never come to us. Hopefully that answers the question. If it doesn't, please, did that come in through email?
Yep.
If it came in through email, please follow up with Erin. If it's something you want to talk about individually, please let her know, and I'm happy to discuss it, understanding that there's certain confidentiality that we would have to keep, and a lot of the things is, again, it's out of the purview of this committee and sits, again, by the Education Reform Act. It sits mainly with the building principal. And by the way, that even goes to coaches. So coaches are mostly under, even though they work in the athletic department for Brian, Mark is technically the hiring manager, especially if it's a non-teacher, or even if it's a teacher in a different building. Their coaching hiring is done by Mark, but if they're a middle school teacher, like I guess Greg Zapati is hired by Donna as a middle school teacher, but hired by Mark as the track coach, and not that Coach Zapati did anything wrong. He's now a Hall of Famer, so using him as an example of a situation, not of a problem. So hopefully that answered it. Okay? Tim, why are you there for a second?
Well, no,
No,
just to
okay.
follow up,
Sure.
just asking if we would ever consider parent and student surveys, and I'm happy to talk
Yeah.
offline with them.
Yeah, okay. So, again, the only thing, Natalie, if you want to shoot the budget, the calendar piece to me, I can give feedback and we can go from there. Real quick, last item of business, future meetings. We're hoping to meet next Tuesday night, the 9th, and the reason why is we're trying to bring some students in to discuss fees at the high school. Erin and I have met a couple times today with Mr. Talbot and a group of students, great group of kids who would like to come and address us. The reason why it has to be next week and not the following is the following week is production week. And
They happen to be in the play.
most of the group is in the play, so they cannot be
I
here.
have here for Tuesday the night that they have a mandatory rehearsal for the cast of Mamma Mia. I put that on the schedule.
They told us they could
They
make
would be
it
able to
today.
come on the 9th, but not on the 16th.
Yes.
Okay, just throwing that out that I plugged
And if
it
we
in.
have to move them later because they have an early rehearsal, we definitely will. But we're trying to meet the 9th because they definitely cannot meet the 16th. It would be a relatively brief agenda, I think, at this point. But fees, we would talk about. The other question is, Sue has asked if we would look at the building usage fee, mainly with regard to outside groups at the high school. If we would like to, we could start the discussion at that meeting, or it gets, as part of the fee discussion, whatever the committee chooses, we will do, mainly around music instruction. So, first question, thoughts on the 9th? Does it not work for anybody?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good.
Okay, good. So we are the 9th. We'll confirm with that group of kids.
So other than fees, what else are you hoping to accomplish on the 9th, since it's 6 days a week? What else are you hoping to get? Is there something
Talk
else here
about the
that you
building
want?
usage.
Yeah, I think-
Yes,
I
the
think-
building usage fee and the student activity fee.
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
And I think we can do the legislative update, which is number 3, which was for October. Subcommittee updates, I think what we should do is we can give subcommittee updates.
Yep, Ed Sub hasn't met yet, but we're gonna.
We could do what we could do with the other groups.
Okay.
If policy could say which policies they're looking at.
Yep.
There are a couple that have come out through MASC that we should look at, and we could talk quickly about where we are with budget and long-term planning, what we need to do for that, especially in light of what happened at town meeting. Fair enough?
Got it.
Which was for budget-wise, that was positive, so. Okay. At 9:18, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Susie, second by David. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? All right, thanks, everyone. Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thanks, everybody, see you in a week.
Thanks, everybody.